Sword of Coming Chapter 1238. Chapter 1238. Mountains and seas are moving like magic. The bright moon rises over the sea. The word is really wonderful and has an endless aftertaste. Even if a swordsman uses the method of traveling in the spirit, no matter how fast he wields his sword, he will definitely not be able to compare with the three-mountain talisman that casually crosses continents, nor can he compare with that night sailing ship. An ethereal Dharma image passed by thousands of islands in the sea. On the sea, the majestic sword energy broke through countless clouds, and the green shadow opened up extremely long roads in the clouds. Occasionally, the water descendant looked up in fear and saw the green sword light flashing away, flickering on and off. After a moment, there was a series of deafening thunder, resounding across the lonely sea and sky. Occasionally, the sword fairy lowered his sword and his sword energy cut through the waves. He passed by a certain isolated island overseas, and the green mountains tilted to one side, making a rustling sound. Passing by an unknown fairy mansion on the sea, there are rows of gorgeous buildings and bright lights. The Xian figure that was about to hit the island in a straight line was instantly divided into dozens of sword lights high and low, just around the ancestral mountain. The dazzling sword light separated by the mountains dragged out dazzling tracks in the air, filled with brilliance, and condensed into a line on the sea more than 100 miles away. In the gap between adjusting his breath and breathing, he slowed down the sword light and Qin Pingon appeared, drawing a half-arc. His green shirt fell on the sea and he walked on the waves with long strides, his sleeves fluttering, filled with the sea breeze. If you want to encounter a ferry boat or a chi practitioner traveling in the vast sea, it is like finding a needle in a haystack. Tonight, Qin Pingon actually met someone. This person drove a talisman boat and slowly followed a mysterious cloud shining under the moon. The young monk threw his pole into the sea of clouds. Qin Pingon stopped at the edge of the colorful sea of clouds. The leisurely young fishing man raised his eyes and asked in Nan Pajuo's elegant words, "Who is it?" Qin Pingon smiled and said in the most authentic Zhou Xian, "A land immortal who goes to sea to visit immortals." The young man twists his wrist, draws the rod and scatters the bait. Ripples appear in the sea of colorful clouds. He pulls back the fishing line, rubs a piece of secret bait on the hook again, and throws the rod once. Whistling into the wind, the tiny golden fishing line becomes undetectable. More than 100 feet long, the young man smiled and said, "A fellow man?" Qin Pingon nodded and said, "This master of the Tao is not weaker than others." The young man laughed dumbly and did not speak a word, while the strange man in green shirt who looked suspicious just stood there, his figure drifting with the clouds, and looked at him very patiently for half an hour. The young man had no choice but to say, "You may not catch a fish even if you sit there for decades. If you wait for me to catch a colorful crested fish before leaving, I'm afraid you will be disappointed." Qin Pingon raised his chin and asked, "Show me the fish basket?" A bamboo fish basket was hung on the bow of the boat and submerged in the clouds. "The quality is good and he is clearly the Dragon King on the mountain." The young man smiled and said, "Seeing that there is no one around, you are sure that I have no protector. Are you trying to deceive me into not being a high-level person and plan to kill people and gain goods?" Qin Pingon smiled and said, "Fellow Daoist, are you from Dahanshui in Nanbosu continent?" The young man with an ancient jade seal hanging on his waist frowned and said nothing. Did this person come prepared? Want both the Dragon King basket and this ancestral token? Today's wild cultivators at sea have a big appetite. It couldn't be that he had bumped into a wild remnant hiding in the sea, right? Very good, the little fish won't eat the big fish, so let me weigh this person's weight. Long Qing, the founder of Daoist, was also the master of this young man. He once obtained an ancient stone box protected by it in Langshui. There were 5 seals in the box. Long Qing only left 1 jade seal and gave away the rest to the Confucian temple. Long Qing carefully refined the jade seal for 300 years, and it became the sect's treasure of Daoist. It can almost be regarded as a token of the sect master. Now it is hanging on the young monk's waist. The young man put away his fishing rod, stood up and announced his identity. "Zhou Xian, a member of the Daoist Saiji mansion. Please tell me the name of my fellow Daoist and teach you the tradition." Qin Pingon waved his hand to indicate that he had no intention of discussing Taoism, and said with a smile, "I am very familiar with Yuan Qingshu." The young man smiled and asked, "Are Master Yuan familiar with you?" Qin Pingon nodded and said, It's familiar. Lu Xiang narrowed his eyes and said, "Why don't you just say that there is a sign hanging above your shop that says, 'The world here should know that I Yuan Qingshu am the sword immortal'?" I never thought that the guy was very shameless, so he nodded and said, "Fellow Taoist helped me say what I originally wanted to say." Fortunately, Lu Xiang is not weak at cultivating qi, otherwise he would really curse. I was fishing in the South China Sea, which is far away from Aquarius continent. When I met a passerby, I said that I was the last hidden official of the Great Sword Qi Wall. Do you think Shan Zaixiu is stupid because he wants to make money, or do you think I, Lu Xiang, am stupid? Qin Pingon said, "Li Kai once returned a broken sword-raising gourd to Daongshui." Lu Xiang was shocked and confused. How did this guy know such secrets? De Yunshui has a total of 5 channels, and it was Uncle Yuan who opened up the line of sword cultivation. The relic was indeed given to De Yunshui Tuiluo Mansion by Li Jianxian of Duckweed Sword Lake. Qin Pingon said, "Yuan Jianxian is fond of wine. He once joked with Gao Kuei at the top of the city that he used a sword gourd to store wine, and used the name of a big demon to make wine and food. The taste is endless and the most delicious." Lu Xiang asked, "Who are you? Damn it, if you were really that young hidden official I would take your last name." In short, Lu Xiang just didn't believe that the man in green shirt in front of him happened to be the Qin Jianxian he had been longing for. How could there be such a coincidence in the world? Besides, Li Kai and other sword immortals who have visited Daongshui one after another over the years all said that the new hidden official who first revealed his identity at Chunban's High in Hanging Mountain was so murderous that he almost killed his own people. Sigh. On this point, Lu Xiang verified the statements of some cross-continental ferry stewards and ship owners through various mountain rumors and gossip. The young hidden official was indeed vigorous and resolute. He once closed the door and killed people if he disagreed. The most important thing is that they all swore that the young swordsman was not ordinary handsome, with a jade tree facing the wind, and outsiders would be able to recognize his unusualness at a glance. Lu Xiang looked carefully. The man in front of him had a hosta on his head. He wore a blue shirt, a long coat and cloth shoes. In terms of appearance, he could only be regarded as Zhou Xian, but in terms of bearing. I was so stupid. I stood there and watched him fishing for half an hour. He must not be Qin Pingon. Qin Pingon smiled and said, "My Taoist friends are vulgar, aren't they? People should not be judged by their appearance." Lu Xiang held it in for a long time and asked tentatively, "Fellow Taoist, did you use a blind trick and use the immortal disguise technique?" Qin Pingon was choked for words. "If you're not a swordsman, it's just difficult to talk to." After all, Lu Xiang was feeling lucky and wanted to chat for a few words, but he saw the man in green shirt wave his sleeves. In an instant, a sea of colorful clouds surged violently, and several fish jumped out of the clouds on their own and jumped into the talisman boat. The next moment, King Shan's figure was no longer visible, and a lingering voice lingered in Lu Xiang's ears. "When my fellow Taoist returned home, he just said that he caught it himself, so he didn't need to spend money to buy it from Nanhai Fish Market." Lu Xiang was stunned. Although he still couldn't determine the identity of the other party, it was definitely true that they were people of the same mind. Then at the border of the South China Sea and the East China Sea, Qin Pingon suddenly stopped and looked down at the bright moon in the sea. There was an old Taoist priest in purple clothes and a gourd on his back, rising slowly from the bright moon. It was a phantom that Zhou Xian used his magical power to appear in the world. Qin Pingon said, "This junior has met Mr. Yu." Zhou Xian smiled and returned the bow. "Fellow Daoist Qin, there is no need to be more polite." Qin Pingon asked with a smile, "Are you worried that the younger generation will mislead the younger generation?" Zhou Xian waved his hands and said, "How is that possible? The poor Taoist vision of people and the preaching skills of fellow Taoists are the best in the world." That's what he said, but after all, it was a bit shocking for an immortal to dare to talk about the method of ascension. At that time, Bai Jing almost mistakenly thought that his mountain master was drunk and talking drunkenly. Naturally, Zhou Xian was still a little worried. Walking hand in hand on the sea covered with moonlight like snow-white fish scales, knowing what the old man was worried about, Qin Pingon carefully considered every word and said slowly, "In this closed-door practice, the real years that Taoist Ding needs to spend are short. 10 years, up to 100 years. Zhou Xian twirled his beard silently. You have to figure it out. With Taoist Ding's monastic qualifications, it is not impossible for him to achieve enlightenment and ascend within 200 to 300 years. Qin Pingon thought to himself and said, "It's not that it can't take longer, but it's meaningless." Zhou Xian finally couldn't help but asked, "What should I say?" Qin Pingon said with a smile, "Don't they say that one age in the mountains means 1,000 years in the world? How can the age of a Taoist be compared with the age of a layman at the foot of the mountain?" Zhou Xian became nervous and said tentatively, "Fellow Daoist Qin, Taoist Ding is the best young man in Pindo's sect. Even if the jade is not polished and cannot be used, you still have to have some restraint, right? Why don't you reveal the details to Pindao, a bystander? So-called false years, how many years are there?" Qin Pingon just gave a vague answer. It could be as short as 10,000 years or as long as 100 million years. Zhou Xian's face was full of astonishment. Half true and half false. Really, this method of fellow Daoist Qin is really unbelievable, ingenious, and something no one has ever thought of. No matter what, I am still worried that Taoist Ding will drift with the tide in the long river of time and waste too much time, and his Taoist heart will not be able to survive it. Qin Pingon smiled and said, "Those who see the true self in chaos can attain enlightenment outside the Tao and ascend." Zhou Xian asked, "Can you explain it carefully?" Qin Pingon shook his head and said, "It's not that I don't want to, but I really can't." Zhou Xian reached out and grabbed Qin Pingon's arm. "We haven't seen each other for a few days, but fellow Daoist Qin has already become estranged. Didn't we talk sincerely at the top of Jiling Peak? Fellow Daoist Qin, you still owe me 500 gold coins and copper coins. It's rare for a poor Taoist to visit Howren. If we don't discuss it, how about a total?" Qin Pingon said helplessly, "From now on I will regularly inform the seniors about the progress of Taoist Ding's practice, exactly as it is." Zhou Xian nodded and said, "That's fine. From time to time, there will be a surprise which is more worth looking forward to than a one-time deal." Qin Pingon thought for a while and gave an obscure so-called answer. "The ascension method I have figured out must first seek self-realization from within, then build a bridge of immortality, and finally seek the Tao from the outside." Zhou Xian chewed for a while and said, "Just hearing this, my trip is worth it." Qin Pingon began to change the topic and asked, "Senior is here, do you have anything else to say?" Zhou Xian grunted and pointed into the distance. "I made a temporary fortune telling that there will be a reunion in the near future. It can be related to you, of course it can have nothing to do with it, it depends on whether you are willing to wade into troubled waters." Qin Pingon guessed the general reason and made a decision in his mind, so he asked a digression, "Why is there never a mountain sitting in the Quanjiao mountain in Friazhou? Whether it is an orthodox one from the imperial court or a heroic spirit who built his own temple for obscenity, it seems like it has never happened before in history." Zhou Xian hesitated for a moment and said with a smile, "There are hundreds of spirits walking around the mountains and rivers, either gods or immortals. Living in the mountains and practicing magical powers or immortal methods, there are always those who like purity." The old man put away the illusion of the moon, while Qin Pingon continued to travel on the sea with his sword. Several serious Taoist priests worked together as free masters in Tiaoyu Mountain, helping the 8 Taoist monks carefully selected from the Great Li dynasty to teach some simple Taoist methods that did not involve the sect's secrets or violate the taboos on the mountain. In fact, it is not a difficult task, and these 4 Taoist priests who have the same ancestor but different sects, see each other every day when they look up and look down. Over time they naturally become more familiar with each other. It is also in Tiaoyu Mountain where the boxing is taught in the martial arts arena, and the preaching place here is in an empty hall. There are several futons on the ground. It is said that they were bought with a lot of money from Sanlang Temple in Luzhou, Beiju. Have to. Bai Feng and the others all told about their situation, but Xiang Tong refused to say another word. At that time even Shui Jisue, the highest-ranking and senior heavenly lord, made no bones about it, saying that he was led by Master Qin into a 9-story glazed pagoda with an extra broom in his hand, and they would sweep the tower together every day. Shui Jisue started from the bottom and Qin Pingon started from the top. Whenever Shui Jisue chose to sweep from the top floor, Qin Pingon would sweep from the first floor. Today Liang Chaoguan asked again. Xiangtong really annoyed them, so he squeezed out 2 words from between his teeth, wandering around. It's not that Xiangtong is being pretentious, it's really the past that he can't bear to look back on. Every time he thinks of it, Xiangtong can't help but shed a handful of bitter tears for himself. It turned out that because of his high-level, strange methods and unclear thinking, he had to drag Xiangtong through thousands of mountains and rivers, and spent about an illusory 100 years. The man surnamed Chen always likes to give him difficult problems, causing him to lose his Taoist skills and no spiritual energy flowing between heaven and earth, but he forces him to be a beggar on the run, forcing him to rely on his ability to rely on a broken bowl. Only the wealthy gentry who are on the richest side can pass the test. I have worked as a fast-moving subordinate in the county government for many years. I rely on a little ancestral three-legged cat handle technique to arrest those gangsters who fly over the walls and suppress water bandits every day. I was almost hacked to death with a knife several times. The emperor's roll call in the capital announced the good news. I was an errand boy begging for a few rewards from the new scholars. I finally relied on my smart legs and knew how to jump over walls and take shortcuts. After getting the money, I might have to be blocked in the alley by a few colleagues. After a few punches and kicks, the guy would jump out and say a few disgusting words like, "In broad daylight under the emperor's feet, don't be arrogant." This scared those away, and then he would cross his arms and lean against the wall. Smiling as he looked at himself with a bruised nose and swollen face, he staggered to his feet. Qin Pingon even asked him to do the job of smashing rocks into his chest in busy thoroughfares or water transport terminals. He raised his arms high and smashed them down with a hammer, which made his chest feel tight and stars in his eyes. There was a burst of noisy cheers. In the middle, the guy had already started shouting loudly and selling dolly pills. Occasionally there are some leisurely mountain walks. The guy said that he combines work and rest, fearing that his Taoist heart will collapse and he will not be able to deal with fellow Taoists in the future. Together we wore straw sandals and carried baskets into the mountains to collect herbs, and stopped by to visit immortals and enjoy the scenery. The guy was full of nonsense and made some nonsense that did not understand illusions and did not follow the rhythm of the common and oblique rhymes. He said that the king was a poet but the guest was a guest, and the prime minister was Bo Wufu. Only Dr. Chen can understand the pity of the fragrant children. He also took over a boot shop that was in a sluggish business in the capital of the country. How did Xiangtong know this? He was naturally blinded. Finally, under the guidance of Qin, Xiangtong sold a roster of officials by the way. Really making money. Xiangtong also worked as a silversmith who cheated and cheated. Not only was his business experience full of copper odor, but Xiangtong, who thought he had some bottom line as a human being, was about to fall out with that guy. However, they also opened a prosperous incense and candle shop outside a certain temple. He doesn't make money or lose money. Xiangtong is neither busy nor idle every day, he just feels calm. Liang Chaoguan saw that Xiangtong, who was known to be arrogant, was acting like a gourd again and wondered, "Xiangtong, since you hate Shanzhuchen so much, why do you still stay? If you leave, wouldn't you be invisible?" Not worried. Xiangtong was silent for a moment and said dully, "Stay here and sharpen your Taoist heart." Liang Chaoguan patted Xiangtong on the shoulder, laughed and said, "Face the difficulties and rise to the top." Xiangtong glanced sideways at Liang Chaoguan, who was getting close to him, and the latter retracted his palm angrily. Xiangtong then asked, "What is the approximate level of the qualifications of these children among the youngest generation of Taoist priests in our Taofu mountain?" Bai Feng intertwined her hands and fingers, straightened her waist and stretched out a lot. She was really too lazy to answer such an idiotic but charming question. Liang Chaoguan smiled and said, "After all, they are the immortal seedlings selected by the Song family of Dali with the efforts of the whole country. It is not difficult to switch to our side and become the direct disciples of the members of the ancestral master hall of each peak. One or two have the best qualifications. No matter how lucky you are, if you fall into the eyes of a certain ancestor, become a disciple and practice Taoism for hundreds of years, you might become the second best Lu Biyu in the Feixian Palace of a certain peak." Lu Biyu was helpless. Although he was in Feixian Palace, Liang Chaoguan was at Yufeng in Taofu Mountain, his ancestral home. There were 4 sects in one mountain and countless Taoist priests. Before coming to Lulu Mountain, he had never met this immortal Yufeng who was extremely destined to be immortal. Any intersection, but Liang Chaoguan has long been heard of. After all, he is a Taoist genius who went to Yunmeng Cave to practice based on his true ability. In addition to practicing Taoism, according to the sect's internal newspapers and some rumors, Liang Chaoguan was a very serious Taoist priest who practiced both talismans and swords. He didn't seem to be so arrogant in his words. The girl in the mink hat checked the Taoist progress of those little melons. She looked unhappy, frowned, and was not very satisfied. She clearly taught the Taoist formulas seriously and explained every step carefully. Why is there still nothing? He was bumping around like a fly on his head and just yelling a few words, but it showed that his preaching ability was not good enough. Xiago then tried to encourage a few words, intending to let a certain ordinary priest teach it several times according to the outline he had drawn up. A fool teaches stupid man, maybe a negative can make a positive and it will have a miraculous effect? Xiago glanced at Bai Feng's chest. The girl in the mink hat said nothing, just shook her head, sighed and left. Liang Chaoguan lowered his voice and asked, Miss Xia, what do you mean? Lu Biyu would not dare to express an opinion on such an issue. Xiangtong said honestly, I find it too cumbersome. Lu Biyu said, Miss Xia is not simple. Liang Chaoguan echoed, it's unpredictable. Bai Feng sneered, drink the wine to understand. Xiangtong, who was born in Hebei Peak, has the highest realm and actually has the highest vision. He hesitated to speak but still did not express his guess. Xiago, who has a girlish appearance, is most likely a swordsman whose swordsmanship is far superior to me, yes. Xiangtong believed that this second-in-command of Lolu Mountain had cut down the old throne. I heard that she also has a Taoist companion named Xiao Mo. If nothing else, he will also be a swordsman. Liang Chaoguan held the back of his head with both hands and sighed, I really don't know how Mr. Qin gathered them together. Except for the divine continent of Middle-earth, all continents are either nominally one continent Taoist masters like Tianjun Qizhen and Xie, or mountain leaders like Jing Hao with unlimited glory. But if we really want to calculate the size of the territory of the 4 seas beyond the 9 continents is so vast that it is far from being comparable to the land, mountains and rivers of a certain continent. In addition to the powerful Mrs. Dandin, who is in charge of land and water transportation, there are also the new kings of the 4 seas, the true Dragon King Zhu of the East China Sea, Li Yeho of the South China Sea Bright Moon, Lu Roshi of the West Sea Buyuan, and Wei Chuanting of the North Sea Hongyun. The underwater mansion of Lord Donghai. Recently, purple air has risen in the mansion, and the atmosphere is majestic, forming a huge whirlpool on the sea. The subordinates and generals of Shuifu have to patrol everywhere to enforce martial law. Unless they hold a special ultimatum issued by the inspection department, no one can approach. Nowadays there are 24 divisions under the jurisdiction of Shuifu, scattered all over the place, like the imperial city of a secular dynasty, occupying thousands of miles of territory, guarding this palace city in the middle. Outside the 9-foot-tall vermilion lacquered gate, in the blue-green jade square, an old man in green shirt appeared out of thin air with his hands behind his back. It's so magnificent it's very intimidating. A golden-armored general holding an iron spear lightly poked the ground with the bottom of the spear and asked in a deep voice, Who is coming? Please identify yourself quickly. The old man ignored it and just looked up at the high and low plaques. Another high-ranking divine general from Shuifu came to the door, followed by a group of elite soldiers with clanging iron armor. The uninvited guest who didn't know how to cross the many passes still didn't look at the water palace priests and soldiers. The general stretched out his hand to hold the handle of the knife and reminded, It is a serious crime to break into the water house without permission. The old man looked away, bored, yawned and said with a smile, I have to suppress my realm to avoid scaring you to death. It's very hard. The Saber God General took a step forward. You are still trying to be mysterious. If you don't tell me your name, don't blame me for taking you to the water prison. The old man in green shirt said, Okay, I have nothing to talk to you. Let Wang Zhu get out and see his old friend. The general was about to activate the Shuifu formation and mobilize one of the water veins to hit this old guy who spoke freely. As a result, the high-ranking general was horrified to find that the water vein belonging to one of the water palace formations was completely uncontrollable. The old man thought to himself and said, That's right, how dare she show up in front of me? A torrential rain spread to the whole world and there were many rainwaters. The little girl was lucky, allowing her to take the lead and break through. Indeed, compared with luck, compared with this evil dragon who survived the disaster, Li Yeho a few are not dominant. So she is even more afraid to see me. A goddess from the ceremony department hurried over, her expression respectful, but she hesitated to speak. How to address each other is really difficult. The person coming is Qin Qinglu, the man who killed the dragon. The old man said, Hey, finally someone who is not blind appears. The chief officer of the etiquette department gave a blessing and said, I have met Qin Xianjun. Qin Qinglu nodded and said with a smile, Wang Zhu has made up his mind not to go out to entertain guests? The female officer looked embarrassed. Just now King Zhu of Shui made a decree, which roughly means to thank guests behind closed doors today. Qin Qinglu sneered, you must be scared to death. Some Shuifu generals who wanted to humiliate their ministers would still fight him even if they had guessed the identity of the old man in green shirt. Qin Qinglu moved forward, and together with the female official of the Department of Ceremony, a group of Water Palace divine generals and soldiers could not help themselves. No matter how hard they struggled, they still had to kneel on the ground to use their magical powers. Like the way of heaven slowly pressing down on the top, they could not help but stand. Every step Qin Qinglu took. In a main hall of Shui Mansion, Shui Lord Zhu, who was sitting on the dragon chair, had a distorted face and was pale and colorless. His hands that were tightly covering the handle of the chair began to tremble. When Qin Qinglu entered the water mansion and got closer and closer to the main hall, Wang Zhu, who had already reached the 14th realm, still did not dare to even think about leaving the dragon chair. When Qin Qinglu was strolling in the courtyard, he came outside the threshold of the main hall. In the main hall, there was no longer the human form of King Zhu of the 14th realm, but a huge snow-white dragon entrenched himself. The huge body of a real dragon, even if it tried its best to curl up, still occupied half of the wide and deep hall. Qin Qinglu still had his hands behind his back. His expression was as usual, but there was a bit more sarcasm in his eyes. He raised one foot, stepped on the threshold and said, a little stronger than before, I just hid, not ran. The giant snow-white dragon slowly raised its head more than 10 feet high. It was just such a small movement, as if all its energy and power had been consumed. It's staring at that, butcher. A blood feud, nothing more than that. Qin Qinglu smiled and said, are you desperate? You are already in the 14th realm, but after seeing me you find it so difficult to even raise your head? After a slim hope is shattered, it is probably true despair. Wang Zhu was confused, but he maintained his true spirit and said hoarsely, if you kill me you will also fall. Confucian Temple rules? It is destined to be unable to stop this dragon-slaying man. And Wang Zhu will never go to the Confucian Temple to beg for mercy. Qin Qinglu sneered and said, today's world is different from the past. Is there still a shortage of true dragons? If you kill one Wang Zhu, there will naturally be a second one to fill it, and some people will be busy. 3,000 years ago, in the battle of slaying a dragon, there was no true dragon in the world. A Lizhu cave was created out of thin air. Qin Qinglu retired after his success and disappeared without a trace. But even if he never shows up again in the past 3,000 years, there is still no dragon species in the world that dares to cross the Thunder Pond. I was just passing by and came here to be a guest, but what you said didn't make sense. Qin Qinglu smiled and said, then take your head and try to polish the edge of the long sword that has been used for 3,000 years? This snow-white true dragon's golden eyes showed obvious hesitation, and its 2 dragon whiskers slowly swayed, creating bursts of pure golden light. Qin Qinglu has an unknown Daoist name, Qingzhu. This dragon-slaying man possesses a more concealed single-character flying sword. But it was not like this from the beginning, but the sword cultivator cultivated the sword through battle, tempered the sword edge and polished it bit by bit. Fijian's natal magical power is just one word. Cut. Qin Qinglu stretched out his hand and grabbed it. The endless sea water in Shui Mansion dried up in an instant, and finally condensed into a long blue sword. Standing up the long sword, Qin Qinglu put his fingers together and flicked it lightly, causing the sword body to vibrate and tremble. Wang Zhu was already very reluctant to resist the aura that was like the pressure of heaven. However, she absolutely refused to kill him by the neck. She raised a claw and pressed the ground of the hall. Qin Qinglu shook his head. You guys from the new 14th realm are simply incredibly weak. Wang Zhu was actually suppressed to the point where he lost his true body and returned to his human form, bleeding from all his orifices and curled up on the dragon chair. At this moment, Qin Qinglu was about to cross the threshold and decapitate the poor guy with a sword, when he suddenly stopped and cursed with a smile. Old you, I like to be nosy. It turned out that there was a middle-aged man beside him, who also looked like a Confucian scholar in blue shirt. It was Qin Pingon. Qin Qinglu exclaimed, haven't you two already terminated the contract? Qin Pingon nodded and smiled. Unknowingly, I passively formed the contract, and when I came to my senses I took the initiative to break the contract. Qin Qinglu squinted at the young mountain master and tooted. Young man with Ning Yao as a Taoist monk, are you still not satisfied? Eat what's in your mouth and think about what's in the pot, isn't it? Qin Pingon couldn't laugh or cry, this was nothing. Want to save her? How? A little Yuanying who just jumped over the immortal realm on the first level of Yupu, dares to show up here? Qin Qinglu turned around and casually shook the sword in his hand. Apart from the realm, why don't we talk about the realm? Qin Pingon glanced at Wang Zhu who was sitting on the dragon chair in the room. Wang Zhu's face was frosty and he looked unappreciative. Qin Qinglu held the sword in one hand, took a step towards Qin Pingon and said with a smile, I don't understand, I am very curious, how are you going to stop me just because our surname is Qin? Qin Pingon bowed and said, I beg you, senior, to sheath your sword boldly. Wang Zhuping was furious for no reason and screamed, Don't beg him. When you were young you asked for help, when you were young you asked for help, and now you still ask for help. I, Wang Zhu, have reached the 14th realm, and the luck of the dragons in the world is condensed in me. You are responsible for your own life and death, so you don't need to meddle in your own business. Qin Pingon squinted into the hall and said angrily, Shut up. Wang Zhu was so angry that his whole body trembled. Qin Qinglu reminded with a smile, Qin Pingon, think about it, if you become my enemy today, the price will be high and the consequences will be even greater. Qin Pingon's eyes were firm and he said slowly, Mr. Qi has entrusted Wang Zhu with something, and I need to be her protector at least once. At least for now, Wang Zhu who left Lizhu Cave has not done anything arrogant. Senior, there is no need to pass the sword to kill the dragon for the time being. Oh. Qin Qinglu twitched his lips. Did Qi Jingchun tell you that personally? Qin Pingon shook his head and said, Mr. Qi, there is no need to say it. Qin Qinglu smiled and said, Immortal realm, it is too useless. Why don't you ask the old scholar to come over and make paste? I also have a suggestion, it is best to bring the ceremonial saint with you. Qin Pingon was silent. Qin Qinglu waited patiently for a moment and sneered, How can a person live such a pitiful life? Shaking his head, Qin Qinglius' wrist shook, and the long sword dispersed into the sea water. You want bully a junior, just think that you owe me a duel with me. Qin Qinglu glanced at Wang Zhu and joked, Can't you promise me twice for saving your life? I can help guard the door. Wang Zhu raised an arm tremblingly, lowered his head, and wiped the blood on his face with the sleeve of his dragon robe. Qin Qinglu put his hands behind his back and said, Qin Xianxia, will you accompany me for a walk? Qin Pingon nodded. Qin Qinglius' first question was unexpected. At the Great Wall of Sword Qi, has Qin Qing ever evaluated his swordsmanship? Qin Pingon said truthfully, The boss sword Immortal has never mentioned the senior. Qin Qinglu rubbed his chin. It's really irritating. Qin Pingon smiled. Qin Pingon asked curiously, I have a question. Did Zhou Zi target you during your spiritual practice? Qin Qinglu laughed and said, I don't like to meddle in other people's business when I'm full. Besides, I can't become a pure sword cultivator in the 15th level. I'm not pure enough. Qin Qinglu changed the question again. I just showed off my water-carrying sword skills a little bit. What do you think is the difference between me and Qin Qingdu? Qin Pingon said, If we put aside the killing power, each one has his own merits in swordsmanship. Besides, the gap in swordsmanship is not small. Even if they are perfect, they are still the same size. Qin Qinglu nodded without saying a word but started to turn around. Wang Zhu, who had just sat up in the hall, turned pale in an instant. Qin Pingon had no choice but to add, The senior said that he was destined not to become a 15th level sword cultivator. The junior thought it was a self-deprecating statement. The Qing master who came out of the mountain with a sword and then put away the sword and retired to seclusion would never be so low-spirited. Qin Qinglu hummed. Only talk about the spirit, not the achievements. That's quite the truth. The two were silent and walked side by side. Before Qin Qinglu left this East China Sea mansion, he said something for no reason. What if you have reached the pinnacle of cultivation in the human world, but you are the least free? If you establish a religion and claim to be your ancestor, you will feel that the world is narrow and the world is narrow. After saying this, Qin Qinglu went to the wild world through a passage back to the ruins. Qin Pingon just wanted to travel far away with his sword, so he continued on his way. Wang Zhu, who had returned to normal, came to him. After all, he is a member of the 14th realm in his own dojo. Qin Pingon said, When I was able to get the opportunity to become a sword holder, What I did and thought is not the real key. In the final analysis, it was because of the trust Mr. Qi gave me. Wang Zhu pursed his lips. Qin Pingon said calmly, whether they are here or not, don't let down those who gave us hope. Wang Zhu bit his lip. Qin Pingon put his hands in his sleeves. As long as you never let Mr. Qi down, I am asking as senior not to draw a sword today, and I won't have to do it in the future. Wang Zhu turned to look at her former neighbor and she slowly raised her hand. Qin Pingon instantly moved a few steps sideways, his expression full of alertness. After all, there is a difference between two realms now. Wang Zhu, however, just had narrow eyes and smoothed his hair from his temples. Qin Pingon tiptoed a little and left the water mansion with sword light like a rainbow. In a peaceful world, the earth is spring, the countryside is thick with smoke, and guests come from the west, and their clothes are still stained by the rain of apricot blossoms. Luo Lo Mountain, this day came a clear old man dressed in Taoist robes, with a gourd tied to his waist. He was dusty and had a piano bag on his back. Immortal Jia just happened to come to this table today to drink tea and reminisce attentively with Taoist Immortal Wei, who has now been promoted to the head of a mountain. The visitor claimed to be Lushan Taoist priest Hong Qingxian named Yu Jian. Because I didn't think about mountain climbing, I didn't register my name with Taoist Xianwei. The old Taoist priest was more talkative and said he was good at playing Lei's harp. He met an equally talkative Jiao Lao Shenxian and they had a good conversation. The old Taoist priest took off his qin bag and showed his hand. Jia Xing was full of admiration and commented from the bottom of his heart, "It is indeed the sound of nature, clank and sound without smoke and fire, and the meaning is not human." In fact, there are often qi practitioners like Hong Qingxian who pretend to pass by at the foot of the mountain. But there are not many people like the old Taoist priest who dare to sit down at the table. Hong Qingxian drank tea and got very close to the old Immortal Jia. He stepped on the watermelon rind and chatted about everything. It was just chatting. Now he mentioned that he had a friend. His official career was quite smooth and he once became the minister of rights of a country. God Jia sees things through but doesn't tell them he makes friends out of nothing. Hong Qingxian continued, Pin Dao met him when he was young. When he was a secretary he got to know this arrogant young man who served as a guard. Immortal Jia asked tentatively, become an official? Hong Qingxian smiled and nodded, revealing his shortcomings. He is indeed a high-ranking official. He is the kind of secretary who writes as much as he gets on the bus and is a secretary regardless of his body. Jia Xing stroked his beard and smiled and said, Taoist family comes from a friendly family, no wonder his speech and behavior are so elegant and natural. Hong Qingxian continued to tell the story of that friend. The prodigal son returned with gold. From a young man who ran rampant in the capital and acted absurdly, he suddenly woke up and began to study hard. After becoming the minister of the Ministry of Rights, he had suggestions with the emperor. The king who controls the country and the minister who governs the country. It is a good thing to believe in the Buddha sincerely, but you should not blindly flatter the Buddha. If all the people's anointing and blood were used to make sacrifices for the feast, how could the Buddha, if he had a spirit, be willing to pay for it? If one obtains blessings by damaging the national treasury, wasting agricultural work and wasting people's energy, then the blessings will surely exceed the blessings prayed for. Practicing Buddhism can provide you with the resources for the next life. Confucianism's cultivation of Qi Jiping is the solution to today's issues. The second monarch changed his mind and began to advocate Taoism, and then destroyed temples and exterminated Buddhism. It was still the old man who had just been awarded the title of Crown Prince and Tai Bao, who openly opposed the emperor's plan to destroy Buddhism and worship Taoism. The reason is that it is wrong to say that today is near and the next life will be far. So the future life is far away and today is near. It is also wrong to only look at today's tomorrow and not the present life and the afterlife. In both the government and the public, some people said that he was just fishing for fame and reputation, and that he would not be able to keep it in his later years. Only a few people think that he is a true scholar. Having said this, the old Taoist priest raised his withered palm and patted the piano bag on the table gently. From young to old we have been close friends, but when he became an official he became a Taoist and became an immortal, it was inevitable that he would gradually drift away. There are no books anymore. Time has passed and times have changed. I revisit my old place. The old romances have been blown away by the rain and wind. The house of my old friend is overgrown with weeds. The old wooden tree is slanted and thin and tough and the branches are like veins. There is only one ancient begonia which is still worthy of the title. She is graceful and graceful like a peerless beauty admiring herself. Immortal Jia sighed endlessly and added, I don't know how many people have fallen drunk in the shadow of flowers. Xianxia picked up the water bowl and said sadly, there is no solution. Jia Xing was reluctant to comment on this matter, so he just picked up the bowl and clinked it with Xianxia. At this moment the young Taoist priest sitting on the bamboo chair suddenly said, there is a solution. Xianxia turned his head and asked with a smile, what's the explanation? The Xianwei replied, if you are weak-minded you will resign and retire to the mountains and forests. This kind of high-spirited and upright behavior has been seen by the descendants of the family, the government and the public, and they all know that there are scholars in the world who study like this, so this is right. It was really helpless and it was difficult to change the situation from bad to clear. I had to make mistakes and join in the bad luck with those who did not follow the same path. However, I tried my best to patch things up in secret and did many good things that benefited the people in the country. Outsiders also let them criticize me. Go, your reputation will be ruined in one moment, but you have a clear conscience, so this is right. Two things, two people and two hearts have never been in vain. They have truly taken root and will blossom and bear fruit in the hearts of others. They may not have lush branches and leaves, but they are like that begonia. After hearing this, the old man thought seriously for a moment and sighed, that's it. Taoist Xianwei smiled and said nothing. Sure enough, you can't ask others about the details of Taoism in the books. Speaking these general Taoist words is what you are good at. Last time Jingwei Guanli Muzhou was treated so well, but now Xianwei is frightened when he meets a true Taoist priest. It was still hard to muster up the courage to say a few words. Of course, the main reason was that Immortal Jia was present and sitting at the gate of the mountain, so the Taoist Immortal did not worry about saying the wrong thing. However, when you do as the Romans do, you still have to treat people with sincerity. Xianwei wanted to add a few more words while the iron was hot, but he couldn't think of a good way to say it for a while, so he hinted at the master of this art at the table, the Grand Master. Immortal Jia immediately understood that it was his duty to do his duty. He immediately followed up with a few sincere words. The truth is such a big truth. Humans, of course, can't be vulgar, but they can't be totally unconventional. But really making these empty truths come true, as Taoist Master Xianwei said, is like budding, blooming and bearing fruit, or making a sapling grow big and straight. One day, it is expected to reach the sky and be able to provide shade, care for neighbors and rest. To passers-by, it is up to us, the mountain masters, to explain the truth in detail. The Xianwei was very impressed. This probably meant that an expert would know if someone was there as soon as he made a move. He was indeed a bit better than himself. Xianxia put down the white bowl. Since Immortal Jia is willing to treat people with sincerity, Pindao can't continue to use a fake identity. Pindao's real name is Kongshan, and the temple is called Cocoon House. Jia Xing asked, burning incense and sitting quietly, an empty mountain with only one person? A cocoon that binds itself? Xianxia nodded and said, Pindao once dug wells and refined elixirs in a small place called Chuanjiao Mountain. He practiced for many years. Unfortunately, I was not talented enough and the path to immortality missed me. The old Taoist priest slapped the gourd on his waist and said with a hearty smile, I usually make some wine by myself, which is pretty good, but it's the poor Taoist who failed me in making the wine. The great Taoist misled me and I mistook the wine, so it's even. Jia Xing raised the bowl, replaced the wine with tea and sighed, Taoist priests walk on the road, live in the mountains when they meet, and stop the water when they meet. They are like gods. At the gate of the mountain there were only 3 of them and they were all Taoist priests. If you praised them you could also praise yourself. Xianxia, whose Taoist name is Kongshan, stood up. The thin old man put his piano bag on his back again and said with a smile, It's funny to say that when I first entered the mountain to practice I was young and frivolous. I didn't know the heights of the sky and the heights. I looked down upon all the Qigong practitioners in the world and only let 3 mountains and 1 person. The old Taoist priest continued to wander alone. Immortal Jia didn't take today's encounter too seriously, he just performed normally and at an average level. When Qin Pingon crossed the sea with his sword, landed on the land of Aquarius continent, and entered the territory of Beiyue, he asked Wei Shenjun to do a favor and returned to Luopa Mountain in an instant. At the gate of the mountain, after hearing a rough idea from the mouth of Immortal Jia, Qin Pingon smiled and said, It seems that I missed a great person from this world. Jia Xing helped to correct a sentence. If we miss each other, we will have something to spare. Sect Master Cui has sent a message with his sword, telling Sword Immortal me not to forget to return to his sect on time. Over at Mi Xiefeng, they are planning to open the mirror flowers and water moon. Everything is ready, only Chief Mi is missing. Jiang Shangzhen, who was a teacher in that village school, actually abducted several young men from neighboring villages to study in his own village school. He felt that his ability to teach students had surpassed that of Shan Zhuqian. In the Tiaoyu Mountain, Grandmaster Wen, who slept hard every day, took a bath, changed his clothes and then sat on a bench to bask in the sun, felt that he was okay again no matter if his skin was itchy. One day he actually asked Pei Qian, who only punched once a day, to raise his level to the limit. After Pei Qian was sure that Wen Qingqing was not joking, he punched him and a large hole appeared in the wall next to the martial arts arena. Before Wen carefully passed out, he vaguely heard Master Jing say, "Old rule, keep accounts, my brothers will get 20% off." The guy named Bai Xian often hangs out at the martial arts arena. After seeing this punch, he quickly picked up the purple clay pot and took a sip of wolfberry tea to calm down his shock. Zheng Dafeng worked hard and swore several oaths before he had the chance to read the hero's book. After closing the book, Zheng Dafeng said something fair. It was really a book of life and death. Bai Xian sat on the bamboo chair under the eaves, looking at the martial arts master, who was said by Zheng Dafeng to be weak in body but not weak in spirit. He only felt that this man was strong and rare in this world. One day the opportunity would come. When he matures, just wait until he breaks the cup as a trump card and beats Pei Qian together. Brother Wen can be the vanguard general. How did Wen Qingxin know about the doorway here, let alone the incident where he was registered in an unusual way? In the eyes of Master Zheng, who saw through it without speaking out, he was just laying on the ground in a ghost gate. In any case, Bai Xian is a child with a strange personality. He is old-fashioned in his words and deeds, but he is the second member of the Luoshan mountain genealogy to recognize him besides Master Zheng, so he usually sits in rows under the eaves together and warms up. I would like to chat with Bai Xian more carefully, especially when he learned that Bai Xian at such a young age was already a secretive Dragon Gate realm swordsman. When Qingxin was even more willing to talk to him warmly, while Zheng Dafeng held back his bad words and secretly Lihi. The two people who lived on Jilling Peak and just had nothing to do all day long were snitched by someone. They went to Mount Masterchen to complain and were driven to Tiaoyu Mountain. However, they did not go to the martial arts arena on the Inyu Peak side of Tiaoyu Mountain to help. Instead, they went to Huaying Peak. Mida Sword Immortal stabbed those few cultivators with flying swords, and Zhou Xian, a golden body martial artist, the 8 chi refiners smashed their spells at the target. The girl in the mink hat, who seemed to be in the top spot, and the chief master, was relatively satisfied, looking at the mess and excitement. However, they don't go to Huaying Peak very often, and there is no such thing as Dianmao. They fish for 3 days and dry the nets for 2 days. As long as no one urges them, they will definitely not go. Zhou Xian wanted to make the Gontang worshipper more effective, so she encouraged the old man to settle down at Huaying Peak, so that he would not have to run back and forth between Jumping Fish Mountain and the sword worship platform. The old deaf child laughed and said nothing. My name is Old Deaf, not an old fool. In addition to Fuyao foothills, Qin Pingon set up a cloud nest formation on Tiaoyu Mountain. Before that, it was obvious that Shan Zhuqian did not want Xiao Mili to interact too much with this group of foreigners, strictly speaking, the anonymous outer disciples of Luopa Mountain. But perhaps because of a temporary change of mind, Master Qin suddenly figured something out, and Protector Zhou's mountain patrol business flourished. The guardians of Lolu Mountain seemed to have more Fuyolu and Taio Yushin, these two silent and mute capable men. The little girl in black was wandering alone on the mountain patrol road. There was no one around except for a green bamboo stick and a small carrying pole. She secretly put on the cloak that was tailor-made for her by the old chef and was just the right size. According to the method taught by the good mountain master, she first stood still, twisted the corner of the cloak with 2 fingers, and then swung it hard, swaggering oh, majestic and majestic. Between Inyu Peak and Huaying Peak in Tiaoyu Mountain, there is a snow-white waterfall cascading down for more than 100 feet, and a stone bridge shaped like a rainbow. Millet grains wearing cloaks and satchels have to stop here every time, and occasionally meet with a certain colleague from Qilong Lane met here. Across a bridge, the 2 sides stood facing each other. The left guardian of Qilong Lane had been lying on the other side for a long time. The little girl in black looked solemn and nodded. When we meet on a narrow road, the brave wins. One runs wildly, the other rushes forward and then leaps high. There is no loser, everyone wins. After landing on the ground and standing still, the little girl in black turned around and clasped her fists. The world is far away, so let's say goodbye today and see you again tomorrow. In fact, it was Gu Kan, an outsider from Luoshan Mountain, who persuaded Qin Pingon to change his mind. Gu Kan said that you are too concerned about protecting Zhou Mili. Do you really need to be so careful? Did Zhou Mili have a protector before she met you in that dumb lake? If you are so cautious in your own poor mountain world, are you underestimating your own mountain guardians and offerings? Today the little girl in black is still wearing a cloak, with her arms folded across her chest, holding a green bamboo staff and a golden pole. She is standing in the middle of the stone bridge. She raises her head and looks at the waterfall. He looked serious and frowned. It turned out that Sister Xiago suggested yesterday that she reveal her true form, stay in the pool and drink water with her mouth wide open. To be precise, she caught the waterfall to see if she could drink enough. Therefore Zhou Mili thought carefully about whether this suggestion was feasible and whether it would be embarrassing or not if someone accidentally saw it. A warm hand pressed on his head. Zhou Mili tilted his head. Oh, it turned out to be the good mountain master. Qin Pingon told her his thoughts and reasons for setting up a cloud nest. Zhou Mili scratched his face and said, what did I think? Such a big deal. Let's take a leisurely walk along the mountain road together. Qin Pingon borrowed the green bamboo stick, and the little girl in black carried a golden pole on her shoulders. The hiking pole poked against the blue stone slab, making a squeaking sound. Zhou Mili raised his palm and placed a pile of melon seeds. While chewing melon seeds, Qin Pingon complained, "It's not easy to practice Taoism. I'm busy with official affairs and I owe a lot of debts to people and studies. There are so many things, big and small, both near and far. The old cook has a backlog of all kinds of letters on his desk. I am worried whether he will reply or how to write the reply." This is the first time for Xianxia, who is chatty and full of complaints, to tell others what is in his heart. One big and one small, they worked together and finished eating the melon seeds. They made empty fists of millet grains and handed them to Qin Pingon. Qin Pingon didn't know what was going on, but he still spread his palms and asked with a smile, "What?" Zhou Mili grinned and said, "I have saved a lot of happiness, so I borrowed some from the good mountain master." One unclenched his fist, the other clenched his fist. Qin Pingon shook his fist to show that he had received it and asked with a smile, "Isn't it a gift?" Zhou Mili nodded vigorously, "I'm only borrowing, not giving away." Qin Pingon smiled and narrowed his eyes, "Don't we still have to calculate interest?" Zhou Mili shook his head and laughed, "It must be." Qin Pingon suddenly said, "Good deal." On the way, when they came under the sunlight, a rainbow hung over the waterfall. Sort of coming. Chapter 1239. Chapter 1239. Writing a juvenile book. There is a row of small bamboo chairs under the eaves of the thatched hut of Baijiantai. Among them is a girl in a mink hat with a leisurely attitude sitting in the slanting sun. Ever since Lao Defer started cultivating at Jiamao in the worship sword platform, it has been a lot more lively here. Of course, it may also be because Bai Xian returned to the mountain from the lower sect. As soon as Bai Xian returned, Qin Lingjun often came here to chat. In addition, the old man, as soon as deaf air entered the mountain, he was given an important task by Master Qin. He had to deal with Xiego from time to time, and Xiego was pulled by the white-haired boy. He worshipped the dock with Guizhuzhio and was promoted as the leader of the alliance. This is probably the so-called situation. During the meeting, the place was packed with distinguished guests, turning the originally deserted sword worship platform into a village head for exchanging information. Today there are a lot of people crowded here again, and there are almost not enough bamboo chairs and benches. The strange thing is that today everyone was given a piece of sweet watermelon. They left it for an hour in the mountain stream. The millet grains squatted by the water and stared at it. Then they took it to the old cook. The kitchen knife fell straight down. Xiao asked where it came from. "Come on, this thing is not in season right now." Zhou Mili laughed and said that the good mountain master stole it from the sand of the island where a small fairy sect was located when he went to sea. He put a big watermelon under each arm and ran away after stealing it. It was probably an ordinary thing there, unattended, and no one noticed the whereabouts of the good mountain master. At that time Zhu Lian nodded and said it was very good. Xiaomili grinned. The big watermelon looked delicious. In the private dojo at the foot of Fuyao, Zhou Xian, who was attacked by a thief, left a whole watermelon for himself and sat in the corridor to eat it. Daoist Ding, who was sitting next to him, had long since quit eating. Although he was not greedy for such ordinary fruits, he felt that Mr. Qin was too lonely. Not like the usual style, unusual. Qin Pingon ate very slowly and became distracted from time to time. Daoist Ding asked, "When will Mr. Qin prepare to teach the ascension method?" Qin Pingon came to his senses and said with a smile, "Wait until I finish eating." Upon hearing this, Daoist Ding immediately felt as if he was facing a formidable enemy. He immediately stabilized his Taoist mind, sat cross-legged, placed his hands on his abdomen and breathed deeply. Although Mr. Qin has lived here for a while, Mr. Qin has never got into the main topic, but Daoist Ding stays here and feels peaceful. Even if he has nothing to do all day long, he does not feel like he is wasting his time. He practices qi on time and occasionally flipping through the books. Time passes by, looking for poems behind closed doors in late spring, waiting to see the plum blossoms after the snow. Before I came, I always felt like I was waiting, and when things came, I felt nervous again. Daoist Ding couldn't help but look at the watermelon a few more times. No matter how he looked at it, it was just a cheap summertime thirst-quenching thing for ordinary people in the market. And that Zhou Xian, who would not spit out the seeds when eating watermelon, had a pile of watermelon rinds piled around him, and he raised his hand to pat his stomach. Qin Pingon wiped the corner of his mouth and said with a smile, "If you cultivate the Tao, there will be no dirt or blemishes. If you cultivate your mind, you should wipe it diligently." The so-called asking the mind is to clean a room and sweep all the dark sides into a small corner without any turning or twisting. There's room. We also need to distinguish between a broom, a dustpan, and dirt. Zhou Xian, who had eaten a whole watermelon, looked calm and spoke plainly, and what he said was commonplace. However, the more Daoist Ding listened, his scalp became numb and he became more and more guilty. It is said that it is a preaching and ascending method. Mr. Qin, who is protecting and observing the Taoism, is he going to be cruel and deadly to himself? You need to be aware that some words in the book are deliberately loud and frightening, such as how someone needs to die in order to gain a lively way. Why should we find a way out of death? If we consider ourselves among thousands of knives, we should use great perseverance to create a place for ourselves and see strength among the ancients. In the past, Daoist Ding didn't have a deep understanding of such empty principles. Because he was a good monk, he didn't have this kind of personal pain. Qin Pingon smiled and said, "Daoist Ding, let me start a small stove for you first. Be careful, pay attention, and remember it carefully. Remember that Goquan's life is in troubled times. The word Goquan has unlimited skills. You must remember your life. It is not only what life is called." Daoist Ding looked at Mr. Qin, who warned him earnestly, and felt that he was a dead man in Qin Pingan's eyes. Qin Pingan's expression became amiable and he asked with a smile, "If life is like a book, what kind of opening would Daoist Ding want? Is it from a poorer family or from a higher starting point? Does life start earlier or later? A little?" Daoist Ding couldn't speak. Qin Pingon thought to himself and said, "I have already thought of the name of this book for my Taoist friends, and it is called Youth." Daoist Ding knew something was wrong. Qin Pingan's eyes were playful and he said, "When things come to a head, there is no way to avoid it. There is no other way to retreat." Daoist Ding's hair stood on end. In an instant, with a plop, Daoist Ding fell backwards and fell to the ground. He didn't know when he woke up. Daoist Ding, who fell to the ground and had completely slept to death, heard the last words in his ears, filled with murderous intent. "Withdraw your troops before the battle. Kill them according to law. Don't look at the Taoist priests who have been thrown away to attain enlightenment. I finally dared to steal the watermelon and eat it." Qin Pingon looked down at the watermelon rind at his feet, looked up into the distance and said to himself, "Maybe what I eat is freedom." Outside the sky, two old men are having a show. Zhou Xian praised Mr. Qin Daoyu for daring to think and do, and the old scholar said something about it. The old master said that the lineage of literary saints really needs to be carried forward, and the old scholar said that Taofu Mountain are prosperous. Gu Qingsong, whose Taoist name is Xianxia, had nothing to do, so he wandered around in a small boat and traveled across the sea of stars. He originally wanted to find the ruins of the ancient heaven, exchange a few words with his master and say thank you for your hard work. Unfortunately, the journey was too far and Gu Qingsong had no choice but to return the same way. Since he was in a bad mood, he wanted to have a few words with Zhou Xian. As a result, I saw the old scholar and Na Yu Lauer, happily drinking wine. How are you two brothers? The old scholar quickly waved his hand and asked Brother Xianxia to have a drink with him. Gu Qingsong glanced at the silent Yu Lao Shenxian and waved his hand. I am of a low level and do not have the status of a sage like an old scholar. This kind of wine game, which must be 28 levels in total, is beyond my reach. Even if you get up, you can't reach Yu Shishi's wine table. Gu Qingsong turned the bow of the boat and said, I will support my shabby boat and you will drink your status wine. The old man who got the nickname Yu Shishir, for nothing, was so exhausted that he was so poor that he didn't dare to speak. When the stern-faced Josie was far away, Yu Xian sighed. There was really a reason why Headmaster Lu did not dare to accept this person as his direct successor. The old scholar laughed softly and said, if not, Gu Qingsong would be worried that his master would forget a disciple who was not named in the first place. Yu Xian nodded, deeply convinced. Yu Xian asked in his heart, Pindao has a rough guess about fellow Daoist Chen's method of ascension. The old scholar hesitated for a moment and said, in this matter, Taozu said a few words in the backyard of Old Man Yang's medicine shop, which is very important. Note 1. Yu Xian breathed a sigh of relief. The old scholar laughed and said, what the Taoist said is not an inspiration. It can only be regarded as a refined summary of the previous ideas. The Tao and the road are in harmony with each other. Yu Xian took another breath. On the flower shadow peak of Tiaoyu Mountain, the 8 boys and girls had different evaluations of the different masters who taught them. It is said that Mr. Gontang, who was enshrined in Lulu Mountain, was an old master who taught seriously and never talked about knowledge elsewhere. He can explain the truth in a profound and simple way and has great preaching skills. Taoist priest Liang Chaoguan teaches in class. He speaks in a soft and glutinous local accent and his words are concise. There is no need to read any books. He talks endlessly and is fascinating. Bai Feng's tone of voice has no inflection and makes people fall asleep. Lu Baiyu's lectures were uninteresting and he was more nervous than the 8 people attending the lecture. Sweat formed on his forehead as soon as he spoke. But outside of class, when 8 people asked him for advice, he changed completely. He was profound and elegant with precise reasoning, unruly and unruly. He occasionally made a few jokes and joked, and his demeanor was completely different from that in the classroom. As for Xiago, who called herself Bai Jing, she also named herself several titles such as Master Master and Chief Instructor. None of the 8 people could understand or learn what she taught. Here at the sword worship platform, Xiago, who seemed to be sleepy today after sharing the spoils and eating melons, suddenly yawned, sat up straight and gave orders. Gone, I heard the mountain master say before that you can rise to the level of sword chi. The origin of the ranks of the great sword immortals at the top of the Great Wall seems to be very unusual. Regarding this matter, the mountain master did not say much and helped you to pass it off, saying that a jar of old wine will become more fragrant with age, so don't hide it. Tell me. He always calls the old deaf boy a general worshipper, which shows that he is too addicted to officialdom. Xiago imitated Bai Xian, who liked to give people nicknames, and gave him this name. The old deaf child complained in his heart. Shanzhuchen was also too talkative. A wrinkled old face, but a smile bloomed. There's nothing worth saying. I just had a bad temper when I was young. When the 2 armies were facing each other after 3 glasses of wine in the big tent, I couldn't. Now that I knew who I was and I was being harassed by an old man from Guanxiang, I went up to the top of the city alone with my sword called Qin, the boss swordsman, and challenged me to a duel. The boss Jianxian agreed. Bai Xian was shocked and said, you weren't killed by the boss sword fairy? Qin Lingjun was even more shocked and said, good question. How can ordinary people ask such tricky questions? Bai Xian thought to himself, that's right. If you chop him to death, the old deaf boy won't be able to pretend to be a master here. After all, Bai Xian was Bai Xian. He stretched out his palm to cover his mouth, turned around and asked softly, Xietzishi, is the old deaf boy a ghost that lingers? Xiago shook his head, a great living person. Bai Xian originally wanted to refute the second-place enshrinement, saying that the old deaf boy is not a human being, but when he thought that Xiago was also from the Wild Monster clan, he decided to forget it to avoid accidental injury. Miyu sneered and said, you are not brave enough to climb up the pole and stretch your neck to wipe the sword edge of the boss swordsman? Or ask the boss swordsman to hold the sword forward with one hand, but do not need to hand the sword and you can stride forward by yourself. Rush towards the tip of the sword and stab yourself to death? The old deaf child turned a deaf ear to the sarcastic words of Mi de Xian. He just subconsciously straightened his back, clenched his fists and placed them on his knees with a look of nostalgia on his face. It's like drinking a jar of old wine. The alcohol is too strong. After a night, the drinker smashes it in his mouth and there seems to be an aftertaste. The old deaf boy was finally willing to take off the jar of old wine and drink it with others. This time to reminisce about old times, I called the boss swordsman by his first name. Qin Qingdu, who had not asked anyone about swordsmanship for many years, and who had not been asked about swordsmanship for even more years, raised his hand and asked for a standard long sword, saying that he would let me perform the swordsmanship that I am most proud of in my life. There were more than 50 attacks and defenses, during which Qin Qing handed me 2 swords. Of course he gave way to me on purpose. No matter what, it is a unique deed in the 10,000-year history of the Sword Qi Great Wall. Even if it was by Xian and Mi de Jianxian who were like this, the local sword cultivators who had never taken the old deaf child seriously felt that the old deaf child was not good after hearing this. Xiego was probably the only one who listened with little interest, but Gontang was at Huaying Peak and had no credit but hard work, so she didn't say anything. In the ancient years when Bai Jing and Xiaomo were traveling far and wide with swords in the human world, Qin Qingdu at that time was actually not that strong. It's not that Qin Qingdu didn't have great swordsmanship at that time, but he couldn't put a big distance between himself and the swordsmen in the world. Moreover, it seems that Qin Qingdu has a special status, and many fellow swordsmen are trying their best to conceal Qin Qingdu's growth, especially deliberately reducing the number of sword exchanges between Qin Qingdu and ancient Daoist priests. In addition, at the same time, there was the unidentified swordsmanship leader. After all, he was a transcendent existence that represented all swordsmen in the world and ranked among the top 10 in the world, so he was recognized as the number 1 person. Moreover, Qin Qingdu was accompanied by Yuan Xiang and Long Jun. They were all very skilled in swordsmanship. Even if they were not as good as Qin Qingdu, the difference was not obvious. Due to Bai Jing's high spirits during the battle to reach the sky, she was seriously injured and had to sleep for thousands of years, causing her to miss many things. Therefore, Xiego today does not particularly understand why several worlds in 10,000 years will respect Qin Qingdu so much, as if they regard him as a god. Qin Lingjun was filled with admiration and clapped his hands. Brother Longxing, you have such great achievements that are worthy of special mention. Why are you so boring? If you leave me alone, I would have been beating gongs and drums and shouting at the top of my lungs. Some of the feats that can be called unique are not because Qin Lingjun doesn't want to show off to others, but they are truly unspeakable. After all, he was living under someone else's roof and was working as an errand in the Luoluo mountain. The old deaf boy suppressed his temper and said something serious. I treasure my broom and I shouldn't say it. On the top of the Great Sword Qi Wall, Qin Qingdu was challenged to a duel fighting swordsmanship with swordsmanship. The key is that Qin Qingdu actually agreed to this question of swordsmanship with great disparity in strength. Qin Qingdu is not a stupid scholar. He doesn't need to use various methods to improve his performance so that he can brag to others. That's not something that can be described as glory despite defeat. If it weren't for Lao Defer's pure swordsmanship, Qin Qing would never have given up such a huge reputation. The old deaf child can indeed be proud of having fought in this battle. Miyu wears a white robe and jade belt all year round, and hangs a sword-raising gourd named Haoyang from his waist. A handsome and distinguished man, a swordsman and a romantic man, he is indeed worthy of Sect Master Cui to open a special show for him. There are many recognized handsome men in the Jianqi Great Wall, including Qi Tingji Sun Jian, who is still young in appearance, and of course Wu Qingpei and Miyu, who is drunk in Yunxia. Wu Qingpei and Miyu are also called double jewels by foreign female cultivators. As for the younger generation, there are Pang Yuanji, Chen Sanqiu and others. The white-haired boy who was the music compiler squatted in the corner and she silently wrote down this stroke. Qin Pingon suddenly appeared at the sword worship platform and said that he might need to truly retreat for a period of time. Recently, except for Xiao Mili, who is still patrolling the mountain at Fiolu, the rest of the people are waiting, so there is no need to go there and be rejected. Instead of using the sword or shrinking method to return to the foot of Fuyao, Qin Pingon chose to walk down the mountain. He called out to the lazy girl in the mink hat, and the one who raised his arms and shouted all the way to wish the Yingguan ancestor a smooth retreat and a successful exit. The ascended white-haired boy. Seeing this scene, the Yingguan ancestor, who still had to listen to the sound, looked as usual, but the old deaf man was actually very worried. But Senior Bai Jing's voice suddenly sounded in my heart. I'm not drinking your old wine in vain. I'll teach you 2 sword skills later. I don't care whether you can master them or practice them successfully. The old deaf boy burst into tears of gratitude, stood up sternly, and without saying a word, he lowered his head and clasped fists with the other side of the mountain road. Bai Xian and Qin Lingjun looked at each other. Why did the old deaf boy who was the least enlightened become so sensible? Could it be that he was possessed by the immortal Jia? Compared with the old deaf boy who entered the mountain later, Zhou Xian, a martial artist who came here to join in the fun with his good brothers, had only been in Lolu Mountain for a few days. In terms of fighting ability, he was far behind the old deaf boy by more than 1,000 miles. Zhou Xian, whose name can easily be mistaken for a woman, is the #1 martial artist in Ahua Blessed Land, Grandmaster Zhong, and is at home in Luo Mountain. At the dinner table before, Zhong Qian had asked about the identity of Gontang worshipper at the sword-worshipping platform. If their realms were not much different, did it mean that she could also be a worshipper? As a result, the old cook said that the old deaf boy was an Ascension Realm sword cultivator. Zhong Qian ate 2 more bowls of rice. That day the old chef rarely took the initiative to cook a few more dishes to go with the wine, and took Zhong Qian to drink some wine and chat for a while. Zhu Lian asked Zhong Qian if she knew her own strengths and weaknesses. Zhong Qian said that she had no strengths and weaknesses and was just a gangster. Zhu Lian then smiled and said that there are people in the world who are nervous as if their body and mind are curled up, and there are people who are relaxed and comfortable. The style of the family and whether the rules are strict often depend on the person and character of the head of the family. This is also the reason why many of the most powerful children of the family dare not breathe at home. They are so reserved when walking, talking, eating, and studying at home that they dare not contradict their elders with even a few words. As soon as he leaves the house, he becomes completely different from the other person. He behaves rebelliously, is arrogant and rude, and has a vicious and violent personality. To a large extent, it is a way to vent his anger and a kind of revenge. It's even more of an unconscious compensation. At that time, the boy in Tsing Yi and Mi De Jiangxian were both present. Qin Lingjun couldn't stop laughing. He reached out and slapped the table, saying that Grandmaster Zhong didn't understand this. Old cook, you are just showing your flirtatious look to a blind man. If Zhong Qian gets angry when she hears such words, then she is not Zhong Qian. She chuckles and says that Jing Qing understands me, and anyone who understands me will be singled out. Qin Lingjun wanted to fight Zhong Qian on the spot, and the 2 brothers knew each other well in boxing. Of course it's punching. However, Miyu has realized something and plans not to pretend to be lazy all year round. Zhu Lian went on to say that we may not be good talkers, nor may we be good listeners. We may understand what others said and what was hidden in their words, but we may not know why they say or do this. There are 2 different things between passively following the crowd and actively following the local customs. After understanding the twists and turns of the world and human relationships, I sat down at my own table and lifted my wine bowl. Whether I was in awe or took a sip of silence, I felt like I was on my own. Otherwise, you will be put in a sack by the world and people, and you will be slapped with a sap. We will always stumble by the same people and the same things, make the same mistakes and suffer the same hardships. When Zhong Qian heard this, she finally couldn't help but ask, does the old cook want me to practice boxing well so as not to lose my title as the #1 martial artist in Fudi? The old cook has good intentions. He really thinks of himself as his junior. So Zhong Qian actually felt warm and moved at that time. As a result, Zhu Lian endured it again and again. Finally, he couldn't hold it back any longer and started pointing at Zhong Qian's nose and yelling, I want you to be discerning and careful. Don't treat this place as a canteen. Miyu, who came here for a morning drink every day, took a sip of wine on the spot. Qin Lingjun, who often came here for a late-night snack, laughed with one hand and slapped the table with the other. When the cursing old cook's attention shifted to them, they stood up and left angrily, not forgetting to take Zhong Qian away. Zhong Qian arrived at the door and said that my brother would come back for a late-night snack in a few nights. Today, for a change, he would help me make a big bowl of spicy hot pot with meat and vegetables. At that time, there was a music editor who was standing in the corner outside the door. As part of his duties he took out a pen and paper and wrote down this grudge. On the mountain road, Qin Pingon said, "When I returned from Fuyao Island, I was reminded by Master Yu that I passed by Dong Haijun Mansion and saw the dragon-slaying man who wanted to mobilize an army." Zhou Xian laughed and said, "With me by your side and so close, the mountain master can still mention their names even if he talks about Qin Qinglu and Wang Zhu." The white-haired boy, the first genealogist of Lulu Mountain, was a typical person who did one thing and loved another. He asked seriously, "May I ask the Yingguan ancestor the specific month and day when you two met?" Qin Pingon was so angry that he raised his arms high and put his fingers together. The white-haired boy shrank his neck and immediately turned around and said, "Forget it, since the ancestor of Yingguan wants to hide his clumsiness, the humble position should not be recorded in the book." Qin Pingon said softly, "The previous meal of wine at the New Year's Eve shop in Qilong Lane, please go through the process again carefully and see if there is anything missing." The white-haired boy said aggrievedly, "The conscience of heaven and earth has not missed a word. Besides, when I reported the military situation to you earlier, I planned to add a lot of details vividly. How did Wang Zhu raise his eyebrows, smile charmingly, etc.?" It was Yingguan Patriarch who was impatient to hear it, so he directly replied, "Stop talking nonsense." "Ah." Bai Jing smiled and said, "I don't think I've heard of this. Captain Kong Ho, hurry up and explain it to the chief captain. It'll help you and Leader Guo claim credit later." They roped in Guizhuzhou and secretly formed a small mountain group. They had a deep friendship and they were like good sisters who had become sworn friends to Jinlan and exchanged posts. In the hometown of Qin Shanzhu and Yingguan Patriarch, there has always been a custom of going from house to house on New Year's Eve in the town. The old people and women would set up a table of wine and food and be responsible for entertaining the guests at home. The adults sat down to drink, while the children came in groups and shouted when they came in, begging for some fruits and snacks. Last year in Qilong Lane, when Shi Rou and the little mute were sitting by the brazier to watch the new year, they met Wang Zhu, who came to ask about dinner. Shi Rou was originally polite and asked Ji Gui if she wanted to sit down and have a drink. I never thought that Wang Zhu, who was already the king of Donghai Sea at that time, actually agreed and praised Shi Rou's plate of smelly mandarin fish. For some reason Shi Rou always felt that Wang Zhu was in a good mood at that time. Later, the white-haired boy who was standing on the bench next door and boxing with others also came to join in the fun. He had a few words of abandonment with the Lord of Donghai Sea, whom he met for the first time and had the good fortune to be the neighbor of Yingguan Patriarch for several years. Among the words, the white-haired boy talked about Qin Qinglu, the man who killed the dragon. The white-haired boy's views were relatively general and belonged to the common knowledge of ordinary monks. She made a metaphor and felt that a powerful dragon could not overwhelm a local snake. What's more, Wang Zhu is still the local leader and Qin Qinglu is just a snake crossing the river, so there is no need to worry about him. But Wang Zhu's answer at that time was very interesting and straightforward. The general meaning was that even if she reached the 14th realm one day, as long as she faced the dragon-slaying person, she would die if she didn't run. Note 2. This surprised the white-haired boy. He was very self-aware compared to Jigui, the maid in Mud Bottle Lane, who he remembered. The reason why the white-haired boy took the initiative to talk about such an unpleasant and taboo topic was because Wu Shuangjiang had told her on the night cruise earlier to try his best to persuade Wang Zhu to leave Howren World and go to Suichu Palace. It's a pity that a white-haired boy is not the material to be a political strategist or lobbyist. As expected, Wang Zhu seemed to have recognized the identity of the white-haired boy and took the initiative to mention the Stork Tower. How could the white-haired boy dare to admit this? Wang Zhu's words were probably that he declined the invitation from Suichu Palace. When Xiego heard this, he raised his hand to hold his mink hat with a sarcastic look on his face. "Run or die." Are these Wang Zhu's original words? The white-haired boy nodded vigorously and said, "Exactly. Today was different from last time." The white-haired boy hesitated again and again, but finally told a little more about the inside story, telling Wu Shuangjiang's plans and thoughts from her heart. Qin Pingon is not a meddlesome person. Since he and Bai Jing were specially called to go down the mountain together, he and Yingguan ancestor should treat others with extra sincerity. The white-haired boy said guiltily, "Qin Pingon, is it because I didn't say this before that something went wrong on your side?" Qin Pingon shook his head and said, "It doesn't matter much. To say the least, even if it does, it has nothing to do with you." The white-haired boy said dully, If something like this happens again in the future, I want talk about it from beginning to end. Qin Pingon said, no need. The white-haired boy wanted to say something else. Xiago smiled and comforted, if it's such a big deal, you can change the story but don't make it so complicated. Qin Pingon fell into deep thought. Of course he didn't know a deeper inside story. As long as Wang Zhu himself is unwilling to say it, no one will be able to know the truth. It turns out that Qi Jingchun once took the initiative to find Wang Zhu and gave her a great prophecy. When you climb up to the stork tower, the sky is vast, and when you go down to the stork tower, it has a long history. Qi Jingchun even taught her how to deal with Qin Qinglu in the future and how to escape a seemingly inevitable fate. She left the palace last year, went to Wu Shuangjiang and practiced in Guanchua Tower. It was a promising future for her and it was probably her best move. Staying in Xianxia and avoiding Qin Qinglu can also be regarded as the middle strategy. In short, you can stay or go. But Wang Zhu was unwilling to compete with the scholar with frosty temples. Just like a naughty child who cannot listen to the teachings of his old-fashioned elders, he must be angry. Whatever you ask me to do, I will do the opposite. Qi Jingchun finally gave her a suggestion with a smile. If you really encounter any difficulty, go to his junior brother. You can tell him that this is senior brother Qi's request. Maybe this is the last resort? Among the two brothers from the literary saint lineage, one was the one who helped her get out of trouble, and the other was the one who formed a contract with her. No matter how much she didn't understand or approve of the way the two of them behaved, there were also decisions that she wouldn't accept even if she understood them. But as proud as Wang Zhu was, he had to admit that they were the two most important people in his life when he started over. Qi Jingchun asked his junior brother Qin Pingon. Qin Pingon begged Qin Qinglu not to hand over the sword. That's why Wang Zhu lost his temper in the main hall. She would rather take the sword and be decapitated than Qin Pingon to beg for mercy. On the mountain road, the three of them were silent for a long time. The white-haired boy asked curiously, before you rush to relieve the siege, since they are facing each other, the enemies are extremely jealous when they meet. Do you want to fight? Qin Pingon shook his head, I can't fight. Wang Zhu had no intention of fighting with Qin Qinglu, not at all. Xiago didn't hide his sarcasm, you're still in the 14th realm, you're a coward. The white-haired boy probably had a good chat with Wang Zhu last time, so he rarely defended the real dragon. When a dragon sees that person, it's like a sword cultivator in the current generation meeting Qin Qingdu. It's also like an ancient sword cultivator meeting the sword holder. Xiago rolled his eyes but did not deny it. Isn't this what Xiaomo is like? Qin Pingon said, according to that plan, if Wang Zhu went to Qingming world, she would not have to share the world's water transportation equally with the masters of land water transportation Mrs. Dandan, and the 4 sea lords including Li Yeho. She could even travel by water twice. First, climbing the Stork Tower is equivalent to a justifiable name recorded in the genealogy, telling the world of Qingming. Go down to the Stork Tower and follow the water into the sea. As long as there are people from the side to help the situation, it is very likely that she will merge with the 14th realm of the Tao. By then she will monopolize the world's water transport. Then she will be able to integrate with the Qingming world Tao, and follow the trend to obtain Bai Yujing's approval. During this period, the Xielong Terrace in the Suichu Palace, which has been idle for many years, has finally been put to use as the mainstay. Wang Zhu can protect Sui Chugong in turn so that the worst result will not occur. In short, this is a fair transaction. Wang Zhu does not need to owe favors. Xiago commented, everything is linked together and is a military strategist's work. The white-haired boy asked tentatively, Ancestor Yin Guan, there is something I don't know whether to say or not. If it were normal, Qin Pingon would not give her a chance to speak. The white-haired boy said, is it possible that Wang Zhu took the initiative to walk into the New Year's shop last time because she actually wanted you to help her make a decision? Qin Pingon was stunned, frowned and said, no way. Regarding Wang Zhu's initiative to visit the New Year's Eve shop in Qilong Lane, he only thought about the first level. Wang Zhu became the Lord of the East Sea, ascended to the Ascension realm, and regained her true dragon identity. According to her usual character and temper, she would definitely not be willing to walk in brocade clothes at night, so she had to show off. Of course, this is indeed Wang Zhu's idea, but it is relatively superficial. Today is different from the past. Once her realm is higher, her vision will be broader and she will see further. Xiago chuckled and said, Mountain Master, don't think about it, it must be like this. Women understand women's thoughts best. We've reached the foot of the mountain. Just when Qin Pingon was about to use the earth-shrinking technique, Xiago's eyes sparkled, he rubbed his hands and suddenly asked, Qin Kinglius Hadao falls and then Hadao is so fun. Can the mountain master tell me? Qin Pingon shook his head. Even if there is speculation about this kind of thing, we can't talk nonsense. Regarding Qin Kinglius' path to harmony, he clearly succeeded in slaying the dragon, but how did he fall into the realm? How did he hide his traces for 3,000 years and return to the 14th realm again? Even Qi Tingji, an old swordsman from the Great Wall of Sword Qi, would be curious. So much so that when he met Liang again during the discussion at the Confucian Temple, he had to ask about it face to face. Qin Qinglu, who had great roots in the world, had an obscure place of origin, and was shrouded in mist during his sword-making process. In the eyes of the vast world, he rose like a comet and then disappeared in an instant, as if he had only done two things. A battle to kill the dragon. He accepted Jing Juzhong as his founding disciple. At that time, Jing Juzhong was present in the meeting hall of the Confucian Temple, so Liang asked Qi Tingji to ask the brother Xian from Baidi City. Note 3. In fact, the relationship between the two parties is not familiar. Liang once sneaked into Fushui, the river that pierced the Yellow River Falls, in the middle of the night. He paddled hard all the way and the carp beat the carp again and again and he passed the dragon gate. Probably Jing Juzhong, who had seen everything, couldn't stand it anymore. He was on the top of the dragon gate, looking at the sloppy swordsman like a drowned rat, and casually chatted with him for a few words. As a result, within a few days, there were countless reports from Xianxia Di, saying that the Lord Zheng of Baidi City personally invited Liang to come to the city for talks. Some said they played a game of chess, a few games, or even hundreds of games. In the Confucian Temple at that time, Jing Juzhong was probably keeping a secret for the sake of his venerable master. And of course he did not want to let a few outsiders reveal the truth about the matter. Especially Liang. Although Jing Juzhong is recognized as the #1 person in the demonic way, there are two things that surprised the monks on the mountain. One is nostalgia for the past and respecting the teacher. Outing in Taishu Mountain is a clear proof. It was Jing Zhezhong's mountain climbing that prevented Outing from going down the mountain. Then there is Jing Juzhong, who seems to be particularly tolerant of his troublemaking junior brother Lu Qicheng. When Liang arrived at the Great Wall of Sword Qi, he had the same mentality as Qi Tingji and was more interested in his colleagues with superb swordsmanship and broad swordsmanship in the world. But he is the little cotton-padded jacket of the boss sword Immortal, and he almost became his godson. Sword cultivators such as Mr. Dong, Qinji and Qi Tingji were too embarrassed to ask, or they simply didn't ask because they knew there would be no answer if they asked. After all, the boss Xianxia never seems to talk about things outside the Great Wall of Sword Qi. Liang is not vague. If he has doubts in his heart, he is not ashamed to ask. Before he became the little cotton-padded jacket of the boss sword Immortal, Liang crossed the Hanging Mountain for the first time. When he arrived at the Great Wall of Sword Qi, the first thing he did was to swagger up to the top of the city and ask Qin Qingdu about it. Have you ever heard of the great swordsman Liang? Qin Qingdu squinted at the short swordsman who couldn't even stand on the same level as Lu Ji when he stood on tiptoe, and replied with a smile, I know your father. Liang was indeed Liang. He laughed endlessly and slapped me with his fist. With your temper and appetite, you must protect me from now on. Probably because he felt that being happy alone was not as good as being happy among others. Liang, who couldn't even taste the wine after drinking, started to ask Qin Qingdu if he had ever heard of Bai Yi, the most proud person in the world, one of the 3 great masters of Haoren. The swordsmanship of Pei Min. At that time, Qin Qingdu just put his hands behind his back and walked around the city. Liang followed beside him, his mouth dry as he talked, and even the Jindan realm sword cultivators he recognized had already signed up for the old man. There is really no other way, so we must use our trump card. When it comes to one person attacking a large group, Liang considers himself a good fighter, a master among masters, but that Qin Qinglu seems to be stronger and there is no reason to be so fierce. After all, it was Liang. The boss sword fairy still gave him a sentence at that time. In fact, it was not an answer. Liang benefited a lot from hearing that sentence and learned a unique skill. Anyway, as long as you're a swordsman, no matter how strong you are, you can't beat me. You can figure out what I'm going to do with my brain. After walking for a while, Qin Pingon reached out and pressed the mink hat on Xiago's head and said with a smile, Don't be so impulsive in the future. You won't do it. The white-haired boy's eyes turned rapidly. Is there a story? According to the consistent style of Yingguan ancestor, this story is unlikely to have a charming and rouge atmosphere. So Xiego is having with someone? Xiego laughed and said, the heroes are happy and the sages are miserable. I am a swordsman who is unparalleled in the world. There is a solitary peak standing on the seashore of Aquarius Island, rising suddenly like a sword pointing at the sky. It is a barren land without spiritual energy, so no chi practitioners have lived and practiced here in history, and there are almost no people in the mountains. At this moment, there was a sloppy Taoist priest with messy hair on the top of the mountain, barefoot and carrying an umbrella. This Taoist Gu signed himself as a Taoist with 300 coins and was nicknamed Huainan. When the Confucian temple was consecrated to the 5 mountains of Beipingzu, Taoist Gu once appeared at the Zishan mountain in Zhongyue to congratulate the tiger mansion from a distance. The real person was not acquainted with him in person. Even the tiger Jing Qing failed to recognize the Taoist priest's feet, but was caught by Qin, who recognized the goods. Qinglu found clues. The Zhongyue mountain and Zishan mountain in the territory of the old Zhou Ying dynasty were once one of the many alchemy places for old Taoist priests. Lao Tiger, who later chose Jing Qing as his successor, was actually a fire-burning Taoist boy who served Gu Xianjun for hundreds of years from the beginning. Before the old Taoist priest went out to travel, he did not tell the young Taoist boy about his return date. He only left an unknown prophecy to the latter. Daizhong Peak would be mastered by a courier who sincerely respects incense. Previously, Qin Qinglu took the old Taoist to meet his junior disciple Lu Qiqing and his disciple Gu Kan, and introduced him as fellow Taoist Ziqing. According to the barefoot Taoist priest himself, he and Qin Qinglu were half-friends. Note 4. The old Taoist frowned. The person we were waiting for here was Qin Qinglu, who was going on a long sea voyage. He told him to wait for a while and then go back. Of course, he might not go back and just say goodbye, so fellow Taoist just said need to wait half an hour. Of course, Daoren Gu knew what Qin Qinglu was going to do. It wasn't that he didn't want to persuade him, it was just that he couldn't persuade him to stay. He couldn't persuade him at all. The old Taoist priest looked melancholy. Old friends died one after another on the road, and farewells often turned into farewells. Unfortunately, spring grass still grows in the same place every year. On the top of the mountain, next to the barefooted old Taoist, there were 2 people who could fight each other with 8 poles. One was a little intimate and the other was a little anecdotal. The old one and the young one have recently moved here to build a well in Gufeng Mountain. The old one is Gudoran's younger brother Wei Benyuan, the old head of the Wei family in Taoya Lane Liju Cave. Or to be precise, he has recovered his memory. The predecessor of the Taoist priest Wang Min, he, like Lu Yu, a native of Lizidongshan, was one of the unnamed disciples of Mr. Sanshan Jiuho. After the accident that happened in Liju Cave, it took root and was reduced to a blessed place. Wei Benyuan left his hometown and chose to live in seclusion in a mountain call outside Zus Qingfeng City to refine alchemy. The main reason was to help his maid Taoya, who regarded him as his own granddaughter. Seeking the opportunity of the Fox Kingdom to see if she has the good fortune to become the master of the Fox Kingdom first, and then the new master of the entire Fox clan. If she can succeed, then of course Taoya will be able to reach the 14th realm in the future. It can be reconciled, at least there is a glimmer of hope. It's a pity that it didn't work out. Taoya did indeed get a great opportunity in the Fox Kingdom. Logically speaking, he could follow the plan step by step. Taoya would encounter various opportunities on the road of cultivation, such as overcoming tribulations and cultivating Taoism. But before long, everyone in the Fox country was abducted and returned to their hometown, Luo Mountain. Wang Min has nothing to do about this. The book says that even if you wear iron shoes, you won't be able to find it, so why does it take no effort at all? How come I came here to work hard but the mountain has grown and gone away? Fortunately, Wang Min is open-minded and thinks that this is the so-called divine will in the dark. He insists on forcing it, but his efforts are insufficient and he misses the opportunity because of it. Miss Taoya girl? Wang Min confessed his thoughts and plans to Taoya, and Taoya was even more generous. Instead of complaining, she felt relieved. Deng Mat Songyo, preparation Luo Mosquito Chaos, Mu Sangsha Mother. Yes. Shun Purple Camphor plays Huang Xiaotun Wumi feed? Taoist Gu smiled and asked, Taoya, let's just talk about the matter without mentioning your intentions. Do you really want to care about it? Or is it because Luo Shan has ruined your future, And you don't have any resentment in your heart? Taoyu was stunned for a moment. Gudaran continued. To use an analogy that is not particularly appropriate, if you are at a gambling table and you place a small bet, you have a chance of winning a big one, but as a result the entire gambling table is taken away. Taoyu carefully replied, Uncle Gu, I don't like gambling. Taoyu seems to be ignorant and simple, but in fact her little calculations are so loud that even Luo Luoshan may have heard her. An orphan from Mu Ping Lane in her hometown could reach this point, but she didn't think she had what it took to compete with Master Chen. Why would she risk her life to become his enemy? What's more, the other party didn't deliberately remove a gambling table against her. The little capital she left on the table and the gambling money she earned from trying her luck were not taken away at the same time. She could just accept it as she saw fit. The two Taoist priests looked at each other and smiled. Wang Min looked at the vast sea and asked softly, Brother Gu, you won't make a big fuss, right? Taoist Gu said, It's impossible to tell. The method of yin and yang derivation and calculation can't calculate the 14th realm, so it will take a detour on its own. That Taoist friend is a solitary person, barefoot and not afraid of wearing shoes. Occasionally he can be motivated. Take it upon yourself. Wang Min said, Didn't that fellow Daoist Qingzhu still have a Baidi city and disciples? He was passed down from the Dao lineage. Taoist Gu laughed dumbly. Fellow Taoist Qingzhu, even if there is a quarrel, does he still need to worry about the safety of his first disciple? Wang Min was speechless. Taoist Gu sighed. I just hope that the road of the world will turn around and not be like today's confrontation between the two. The matter was so important that Taoist Gu even asked his master if there was a way to solve it. But Mr. Sanshan Jiuho did not respond to his direct disciple's voice at all. If we talk about dragons in the world, all dragon descendants, Narcissus, and all Qi practitioners who practice water magic in the world will be defeated by Qin Qinglia's swordsmanship to varying degrees. If you go back a little further, you will come to an even more shocking conclusion. A place near water in the world is equivalent to the dojo of sword cultivator Qin Qinglu. If we make a bold assumption, after 3,000 years of silence quietly sharpening the edge of the sword, now the long river of time to Qin Qinglu, is it a kind of water in a broad sense? What's more, being able to delete the name of a natal flying sword, upgrade it from a double-character flying sword to a single-character flying sword, and then polish it to perfection, this is where Qin Qinglia's heritage and confidence lies today. This is also a gift from the Great Road that completes the merits of the dragon-slaying battle. 3,000 years ago, there were countless dragons in the world, and there were more and more dragon palaces in the rivers and seas on land and sea. The Confucian Temple needed to write a separate book for them. The sons and grandsons of the dragon, who enjoy great achievements in the Book of Merit, act rebelliously and refuse to be controlled by the gods of mountains and rivers. They go to war with various swordsmen and immortals, causing trouble and ruining their lives. In the end, they are separated from the Confucian Temple. I have unknowingly fallen into a situation of, heaven is disgusted. You must know that the earliest ancient sword immortals, for example, just talking about the ancient Shu realm, did not go there to hunt for treasures, they simply couldn't stand it anymore. Lu Shen, who seemed to be unable to float in the sea on a boat, once advised those ancient dragon kings with the highest status to restrain themselves and rectify them, otherwise their incense will be extinguished. Do not believe. It may also be that the long-standing evils are so deep that the illness is difficult to cure. Even if those dragon kings who have experienced the battle to reach heaven are unable to make a difference, even if they want to make a difference. Wang Min said worriedly, they are both swordsmen, one is an old 14er, and the other is a young swordsman with excellent abilities and backgrounds. When they meet, it is easy to break up if they disagree. Although he had recovered his realm cultivation and memory of his previous life, he still subconsciously regarded himself as a native of Lizhu Cave Heaven. And Qin Pingon is the most outstanding figure among the younger generation in his hometown. Wang Min does not want such a young man to be overshadowed and lost to everyone if his path is blocked. He fell into a similar situation to a certain great monk in Ai Aizhou. Daoran Gu smiled and said, From what I heard, do you think you prefer Qin Pingon more? Wang Min looked a little proud and said with a smile, I am not familiar with fellow Taoist Qingzhu and have never met him. But back in the small town I was optimistic about Qin Pingon very early. Maybe I can be regarded as the first one? Note 5. Taoist Gu nodded and said with a smile, When Master Qin met the poor Taoist who had never met him before, at most he would call you senior, or Mr. Zhou Xian out of courtesy. When he meets you again, he should sincerely call you Grandpa Wei. The title deed to the immortal tomb outside the town is still in the hands of the Wei family. Even though the Song family of Dali was at the pinnacle of the dynasty in a country or a continent, they did not embarrass the Wei family of Taoya Lane in this matter, asking the latter to hand over the land deeds and buy and sell by force. Just because the specific layout of the method of trapping the dragon in Lizhu Cave was all created by the predecessor Wang Min, the realm of the immortal cemetery is the reward that the successor Wei Benyuan deserves. At that time his master issued a decree, asking him to pick up his junior brother, Wei Benyuan from Taoya Lane, a Taoist priest who should never discuss yin-yang and the 5 elements with Zhou Zi. In fact, the predecessor Wang Min was not a direct disciple, but an unnamed disciple of Mr. Sanshan Jiuho. And this happens to be where Wang Min's heart lies. He wants to prove himself so much that he already has the qualifications to pass on. Xiago looks down on the Taoist priests in today's world. She feels that today's qi refiners are not tenacious enough to seek Taoism. Not always, there are always exceptions. Because Brother Gu had revealed the secret earlier, Wang Min complained, "What did Yu Zhenren think? Why did he have to let Qin Pingon wade through the muddy water? A rich man who has never worried about money in his life just borrowed some money, and in his heart aren't you happy?" Daoren Gu joked, "Junior brother, I just stand and talk without pain in my back. Why don't you borrow so much money to go out and give it a try?" Wang Min laughed loudly and said, "I want to have hundreds or even thousands of gold and copper coins. I would have borrowed them a long time ago." Daoren Gu asked, "Junior brother, do you have one?" Wang Min said, "I don't have it. That's why I said it. I got it for free." Daoren Gu stretched out a hand. "What a coincidence, I happen to have 500 gold and copper coins on hand. I will lend it to you first and then you will lend it to Qin Pingon. Let's negotiate the interest first and then you will calculate the interest with Qin Pingon. Whether it's a loss or a profit, we brothers and sisters, each depends on his own ability." Wang Min pushed his senior brother's arm back hard, but it couldn't be pushed back and the situation was deadlocked. Taoist Gu smiled and said, "Zhenwu Mountain has already expressed its opinions. Junior brother, you, the elder from the same village who first saw the promise of Qinshan's road, don't you mean it?" Wang Min smiled bitterly and said, "It's better to keep a respectful distance." Taoist Gu retracted his hand, "Then let's make a compromise. The Wei family can return the immortal tomb to the Song family in Dali." Wang Min nodded and said, "Junior brother will write a letter immediately and send it to the ancestral home in Taoya Lane." Taoist Gu said to himself, "It is a fact that Qin Qinglu is close to Luopa Mountain. Otherwise he wouldn't have had so many drinks with Qin Lingjun. The little boy in Tsing-yi, the river snake in Huangting Kingdom, the nascent soul realm water dragon that has successfully desecrated it, the enshrinement of Luopa Mountain and the blank front page of the passerby's book, all dare not write their names. If you include Jia Xing, the blind Taoist priest who Qin Qinglu first attached to, and the 2 from Luzhou and Beiju, the coachman was busy in vain, and the Confucian scholar Qin Zhuoyo could all join the table. They are all Qin Lingjun's close friends who met irreversibly in their own world. Every time Daoren Gu thinks of this matter and imagines this scene, he feels speechless. Above the sea, blue light appeared. Daoren Gu's heart was shaken and he took a deep breath. Wang Min, who knew the pros and cons, was even more nervous. Qin Qinglu came to the top of the mountain in an instant, shook his sleeves and joked, "You 2 Taoist priests, are you so worried about worldly affairs?" Taoist Gu asked, "Have you met Master Qin?" Qin Qinglu nodded and said, "I see." Wang Min asked, "How to say?" Qin Qinglu smiled and asked, "If I remember correctly, Gu Xianjun and I have a half-baked relationship, and I am very familiar with fellow Taoist Wei? Have I, noble one, forgotten things?" Wang Min smiled and held fists with the swordsman named Qingzhu to apologize. Qin Qinglu nodded. "He has a low moral character and a high spirit, which is exactly the opposite of Zhou Zi." Wang Min's face was full of embarrassment and he didn't dare to answer the question. Taoist Gu said, "Friend Qingzhu, please stop showing off." Qin Qinglu stretched out his hand and brushed his sleeves. There seemed to be sword energy left, and the electric light intertwined and crackled, making Taoist Gu's eyelids tremble. Qin Qinglu said, "Anyway, since I owe Mr. Qi a huge favor, I have to give his junior brother an equally huge favor." The first person to uncover Jia Xing back then was the scholar Qi Jingchun. Qi Jingchun also took the initiative to invite Qin Kinglius' real body, and the two parties had a pleasant conversation and had a drink. Later, because Qi Jingchun took over the affairs, he took on all the causes and effects accumulated by Lizhu Cave Heaven for 3,000 years, as well as all the counterattacks of heaven. At that time, Wang Zhu had not yet regained his true dragon status, which was equivalent to Qi Jingchun helping to take the sword, allowing Qin Qinglu, who was still in the Ascension realm at the time, to bear the backlash of the true dragon's energy. Qin Qinglu never likes to owe anyone anything, so he must pay it back. Previously at Donghai Mansion, the smart young man knew that instead of recruiting reinforcements with the old scholar and Li Xing, he invited Mr. Qi, who did not call him senior brother Qi Jingchun. This forced Qin Qinglu to repay the favor early. Qin Qinglu said with a smile, "Don't worry, a poor boy who was an orphan from Muping Lane and grew up eating the food of hundreds of families has his own reasons to become Master Qin Shanzhu, who is famous today." Daoist Gu was silent. Wang Min still couldn't help but said, "Did Master Qin call the literary saint?" Daoist Gu shook his head, thinking too simply. Unlike his junior brother Wang Min, Daoist Gu has always paid attention to the sky, not to the figure of Xianxia but to the ceremonial saint. Qin Qing said with an exultant laugh, "How can we stop it after calling the old scholar? The only 14 realms that can be reached by Renhe's method are the 3 continents of Hedao Fuyao, Baoping and Tongya." Wang Min clicked his tongue. Qin Qinglu said calmly, "When I decide to hand over the sword, no matter how shameless I am, I can't stop it." In the sea, in that water house, even if the old scholar came in person, he really couldn't stop Qin Qinglu from handing over his sword to behead his head. That's why Qin Qingdu suggested that Qin Pingon should also call the ceremonial saint. If Li Xing is willing to return to Haoren from outside the world, Qin Qing will not be able to kill Wang Zhu for the time being. But next, your Chinese Confucian temple will be on guard against thieves. Qin Qinglu would definitely admit that Li Xing was very capable in fighting, but he still couldn't do it to detain him and go to Gongda Forest. Unless the Li Xing is willing to strip Wang Zhu of his true dragon identity, Qin Qinglu will accept his defeat no matter whether he falls down or goes to jail in the Merit Forest. The problem is that Li Xing cannot do such a thing. So if that young man who has many backers and is a swordsman in the Immortal realm, dares to ignore the seriousness and is in danger without knowing it, he really thinks that with his own strength and a few harsh words, he can stop the really angry Qin Qinglu, then kill the true dragon King Zhu first and kill Qin Pingon as well. As for the kid's method of saving his life, there must be some tricks to the bottom of the box. It's better to become a ghost. It's a pity that someone has already reached the ghost path first. If you want to achieve the 14th realm of the Tao through this, it is destined to be a luxury. Sorry, in addition to the 14th level sword cultivator, I also have a good apprentice. As a master, I never know what Jing Huaixin wants to do. It's even less certain whether he will get involved in this matter. The problem is, can your Confucian temple determine Jing Zhezhong's true thoughts? Then don't bet. Daoist Gu glanced at the sword spirit on his sleeve and asked curiously, "What's going on?" Qin Qinglu said with a smile. A girl in a mink hat popped up out of nowhere. She said she wanted to see with her own eyes whether my swordsmanship is worthy of the 14th realm. Daoist Gu asked, "Is it Bai Jing who has reached the Ascension realm?" Qin Qinglu nodded and said, "It's her." This question of swordsmanship will end as soon as the point is made without harming the harmony. Mainly because Bai Jing acted strangely and seemed to have been stabbed on purpose. Daoist Gu understood clearly. This makes sense and makes perfect sense. Xiao Mo, at most, is asking the young master to ask swordsman. As for Bai Jing, he was a master who dared to sneak up on the ancient scholars' convoy and rain down a sword like a heavy rain. Daoist Gu asked, "How is her swordsmanship?" Qin Qinglu had no idea of answering this question. Daoist Gu just waited patiently for the next chapter, as if he wanted Qin Qinglu to give a fair evaluation. For example, among the worlds in this world, are there any swordsmen with a similar level of swordsmanship and lethality to hers? How does the junior brother Lu Yu, who is also unnamed by his master, compare to the current Ascension Realm sword cultivator Bai Shang? How big is the gap? Or is there any sign of Bai Jing's coming together in the near future? In the next 100 years, in a good year, will she have any chance of coming together? Qin Qinglu didn't answer the question a bit. This is the sword cultivator. Sword cultivator Bai Jing is what he thinks a pure sword cultivator should look like. Daoist Gu said, "I am planning to go to the Buddhist kingdom in the west." Are you interested in traveling with me, Taoist Qingzhu? Qin Qinglu thought for a while, nodded and said, you can go over there and have a look. Wang Min felt complicated. I have forgotten, but I don't know who gave me a strange, profound and incomprehensible evaluation. A swordsman in this world is a martyr. Wang Min suppressed the strange feeling in his heart and asked, Friend Qingzhu, you are a monk in the old 14th realm, how do you view the new 14th realm? Qin Qinglu smiled and said, how do you see it? You don't even look at it. Wang Min was speechless again. Taoist Gu knew the reason. It was not that Qin Qinglu thought too highly of himself. Once he reached the 14th realm with seniority, he could accumulate Taoist power, widen the road and make a so-called single-plank bridge extremely wide and have a deeper realm, especially for people like Qin Qinglu can use the results of the dragon-slaying battle to sharpen their swords and make great strides forward. Furthermore, those in the new 14th realm who were blessed by that heavy rain were either pushed by external forces, pulled by others, or even worse, took some unorthodox shortcuts. In the end, it is not as good as the old blind man and Qin Qinglu who forged their own path, which is equivalent to creating their own destiny, forcing their way in and uniting the world with their own strength. From then on, the sky is high and the freedom is great. Qin Qinglu put his hands behind his back and looked calm. Those who don't know me call me crazy and those who know me call me arrogant. What is true freedom? I only bow to myself. Note 1, Chapter 854, A Bird in a Cage. Note 2, Chapter 950, Things to Come. Note 3, Chapter 790, Preparing for War. Note 4, Chapter 1079, Half of the Book of the World. Note 5, Chapter 32, Peach Leaves. Sword of Coming. Chapter 1240. Chapter 1240, Gathering the mountains into one mountain. It was raining, and each of them held an umbrella and talked endlessly, laughing and talking for a long time. Zhou Xian took a break from his busy schedule and came to the Shanmen archway to say a few words of congratulations to Mr. Jia in person. Immortal Jia often comes to the foot of the mountain to have a few personal words with Taoist Immortal Wei, who has worked hard and made great achievements. When you meet someone, you are a close friend in the world. When you meet someone, you call them brother and brother. After all, it is normal to have a deep friendship for a long time. Old Chef and Jiao Xianxian are not such people. These are great friendships that have been accumulated year after year. They are simmered slowly to bring out the flavor, and the true feelings are revealed after a pleasant drink. Luopa Mountain now has 2 cross-continental ferries. One is the Fengyuan ferry bought by Master Qin from the Xuanmi dynasty in China based on his ability, and the other is a brand new Fengyuan ferry, purchased from the Dequan Yao family of Tonggishao. Thunder Car. And Jia Xing, who has been the second steward of Fengyuan ferry for a short time, is about to be promoted, because before the mountain master went into retreat, he decided to let Jiao Xianxian be the chief steward of the ferry Thunder Car. As for the candidate responsible for guarding the cross-continent ferry, he also let Jia Xing chooses by himself. Immortal Jia heard the string and knew what it meant. We went up the mountain to take action against the lower sect. Immortal Jia, who is already the main lecturer at the Qingping Sword Sex Academy, can certainly tolerate this old face. Zhou Xian said that Immortal Jia was very busy. Jia Xing sighed. Pindao is not busy at all. Compared with the mountain master and Mr. Zhu, it is just a small thing to help the really tired people. Let Pindao do this and that. Is this putting a burden on Pindao's shoulders? No, the mountain master is carrying the burden on his own shoulders. If something goes wrong with the mountain owner's character and magnanimity, he will naturally not blame others but only himself. It is always relaxing and comfortable to have a heart-to-heart talk with God Jialao. They talked happily, and when they were reluctant to part, Zhu Lian asked the old Jia to sit at the sword worship platform when he had time. Jia Xing was more hesitant. He had long wanted to go there to worship at the top of the mountain, because he was worried that it would delay Gantang's dedication to sword refining and Taoism. Zhu Lian smiled and said no. Immortal Jia took advantage of the wind and returned to Qilong Lane, prepared some drinks and cakes, and walked into the mountain to the sword worship platform. But they were told that the old deaf boy, nicknamed Gon Fan Fan, had recently gone to Tiaoyu Mountain to preach and teach. It was hard to say when he would return. Immortal Jia stood under the eaves, calm and collected, hiding from the rain and waiting for someone. Previously, Shanzhu Qin and Protector Yu were wandering around Tiaoyu Mountain. He said that he owed many human debts and literary debts. There was absolutely no exaggeration. Over at Jisa Peak Sword Room, almost every day they receive several Feijian letters whose origins are impossible to guess. Wanshu is responsible for receiving the letters every day and handing them over to Mr. Zhu. He has accumulated several large baskets of various invitations and letters. When Qin Pingon began to retreat, Zhou Xian still followed the point of view he had put forward before. Even if Lolu Mountain was considered by the outside world to be unkind, arrogant and aloof, the owner of the mountain still only had to uphold one purpose: only name and tools and no fake people. Zhou Xian left all the letters that he had no romantic relationship with the sender without exception. He would only record them after a while and record them in the book. Once opened, the contents of many letters were varied, including various invitations to Qin Shanzhu to participate. Celebrations helping to inscribe inscriptions on their own study rooms and famous pavilions. If Shanzhu Qin really doesn't have time to give a calligraphy treasure as a gift, can they collect the inscriptions from the two seals of Bai Jiangxian and Jian Jiangxian on their own? There are also some elegant collections and poetry societies that begged Mr. Qin to come to visit, and some collections of essays sent in. I hope Mr. Qin can help write the preface and correct the content in his spare time. There are also some inexplicable private affairs of the family or sect, or it's a matter of pointing out the current affairs and criticizing the current affairs. It's up to Qin Yingguan to stand up and say something fair. Some of the letters that had to be answered were written by Zhou Xian on his behalf, imitating the tone and handwriting of the mountain master, which was easy and a piece of cake. However, for certain letters such as Fijian's letter directly signed to Paidi Peak or Shuijing Mountain, Zhou Xian still needs to reply on his behalf and explain something to his mountain owner. Zhou Lian's replies were generally worded in a more euphemistic and elegant way, often beginning with the words, "I am deeply sorry to receive this letter. You should never take it seriously when you express love to a real person and write an inscription. I don't want to reprint 2 volumes of seals. I don't want to bring trouble to the future. It's really hard for me to agree. I don't know how to appreciate it and let down the kindness. I feel guilty. It's a pity that I am entangled with the general affairs and cannot take a look at it. The landscapes and rivers written in the letter from the leader are of wonderful shape and every word is exquisite. I am fascinated by it. You can sleep on it. The noble sect has loved me so much that I am so frightened and grateful. I have written a hasty reply without any words." Not wanting to treat himself badly, Xiago brought a few plates of fermented bean curd and pickles from Mr. Zhu's kitchen, and cooked himself a pot of hot rice porridge. Porridge and rice are the most nourishing food in the world. Wei Bo had important matters to discuss that day and had to go to Fiolu private dojo in person. As a result, he was stopped by the girl in the mink hat with rosy cheeks and a bowl of porridge in her hands. She squatted in the corridor and said vaguely, "The owner of the mountain is in retreat and cannot see anyone. It's not that he minded that who included him." Weibo just felt strange. Is this guy really in seclusion? Xiago nodded and helped clarify. It's really not laziness. I'm repeating my old trick of being the hands-off shopkeeper. Our mountain master is very serious and solemn about this retreat. Weibo looked a little embarrassed. Xiago immediately became energetic, raised his chin, tapped the white bowl with his chopsticks and said proudly, "If you have something to do, tell me and I will send a message to you later. I am the second worshipper after all, one of the 5 giants in Luoluo Mountain. Besides, I have the highest status and the biggest official hat." Wei Bo smiled and shook his head. "We have to talk to Qin Pingon face to face about this matter. It's okay and it's not that urgent. We'll come back here in 10 days. During this period, if Qin Pingon comes out of confinement, Xiaxishi will let him. He took a trip to Piyun Mountain." Xiego said, 10 days or 1 month, I can't say for sure now." Wei Bo smiled and said, "It doesn't matter, then I will come here to order once every 10 days. Xiego asked in confusion, "What's going on? Is it worthy for the Lord Night Tour God to visit us so often?" Wei Bo thought for a while and said, "Okay, you can help pass the message and tell me that there is something. His Majesty the Emperor is too embarrassed to speak, so he asked me to be the lobbyist. Since he agreed to attend the ceremony in the near future, the Emperor is afraid of you." The Master of the Mountain did not take the new Imperial Master of Dali's first appearance in the temple seriously. Although the court did not intend to make a big fuss and would certainly not make a big fuss out of this matter, but if he did not say hello to anyone, one day he went to the Imperial Palace in the capital, just to attend the morning court, and it seems unreasonable to leave immediately after showing his face. Therefore, His Majesty the Emperor's intention is to hope that he will show off a little more pomp. Xiego said helplessly, Is it just like this? Is Yeo Shinjun a messenger? Wei Bo said with a smile. Anyway, the words have been brought. How to deal with it depends on Shanju Chen's own wishes. Xiago tried to persuade him. Yeo Shinjun is leaving now? Why don't you chat a few more words? It's boring to be a doorkeeper here. The girl in the mink hat said that he was a night-wandering god, and Wei Bo was really unwilling to stay for a long time. Xiago suddenly said in his heart, I flipped through Kong House Chronicle book, and it recorded a Taoist priest from Chuanjiao Mountain named Cui Qingxian. He had been here before and sat at the table at the foot of the mountain for a long time. I didn't notice anything strange at all. The state of cultivation he showed and the tone of his speech were obviously not up to par. I have been to Chuanjiao Mountain in Fiazu once and it looked weird, which is not something ordinary Taoist priests can maintain. You are the master of Beiwei. Did you sense anything was wrong before? Wei Bo frowned slightly, shook his head and said, I didn't pay attention either. If there was the slightest strange movement, Wei Bo would definitely stare at the mountain gate immediately. Since he has never thought about it, there are only two possibilities. Either the visitor is too ignorant and talks nonsense at the gate of the mountain, boasting and not drafting. Either he has a very high level and is able to conceal his cultivation very well, allowing both himself and Beijing to ignore it. The strangest thing is that if someone from the Ascension realm travels across continents to Aquarius continent now, they have to report in advance to the imitation white jade capital above the Greatly capital. If we assume that the other person is a real person who does not show his face, being able to stay at the gate of Lulu Mountain for so long shows how unusual the other party is. No need to thank the dog for reminding him. Wei Bo dispersed his consciousness. After a moment, a cursory look shows that there is no trace of this person in Beiyue territory. Xiago also held his breath and concentrated. He only saw the vast mountains and rivers of Beiyue just now, like a long golden dragon swimming freely, patrolling the territory at lightning speed. Because the mind of a turned too fast, the mountains and rivers of Beiyue intertwined into a continent. Except for the Ascension stage monks and the Qi refiners, they were completely unaware of the golden light of divine consciousness that stretched like a large net. However, they could not hide it from the rest of the four mountains' divine lords. But Xiago obviously couldn't believe the effect of Wei Bo's natal magical power. He put down his bowls and chopsticks, stood up and said, If you can trust me, I can attach myself to your consciousness and investigate again. Wei Bo nodded and said, Then try again. They are both high-ranking people. With just a few words, Wei Bo used a secret method to temporarily hand over the authority of the to Xiago, who was touring Beiyue together. Xiago quickly complained, There is no need to do this trick. The speed of checking the mountains and rivers is too slow. Do you look down on me? Just spread your consciousness as much as you can. Wei Bo glanced at her. Xiago nodded and said confidently, I'm not just bragging, but the toughness of our sword cultivator's body and soul is extraordinary. Today we must let Lord Yi you have a long experience. In an instant, starting from Fuyao foothills, countless golden rays of light were thrown out in arcs, falling on the Beiyue territory far and near, crisscrossing from point to surface. This golden net is even more dense. Wei Bo put away his magical powers and thanked the dog for helping his mink hat. Either you hide deeply or you run fast. It's definitely not a fuel-efficient lamp. Wei Bo said, since the other party dared to show up at the mountain gate openly and chatted with Jia Xing for so long, it is unlikely that he is some evil person with ulterior motives. Those who practice Taoism on the mountain, regardless of whether they are male or female, as long as they are in high positions, can easily attract the attention of people from all walks of life. Just take Miyu in Tongyi's How. Even if he didn't even get off the boat, how many women on the ferry fell in love with him at first sight and started to fall in love with him? Wei Bo originally thought that Xiago had something to say, but he saw the girl in the mink hat puffed up her cheeks and blinked. As if the look in his eyes indicated, why hasn't Yeo Shinjun left yet? He has changed his mind and plans to chat more? Wei Bo turned his head and glanced at the closed bamboo house. After thinking for a moment, he was about to say goodbye and return to his study place, but he heard a sound of vomiting. Wei Bo quickly turned around and saw that Xiago had his back turned to him, holding a bowl and spitting out a bowl. The girl in the mink hat raised the back of her hand and wiped the corners of her mouth without turning around to explain. Maybe she was embarrassed for the first time? Wei Bo was so considerate after all that he just pretended that nothing had happened and was about to return to Piyun Mountain, only to see the Xia dog raise his head and drink it all in one gulp. Now it was the turn of Wei Bo, who had a mysophobia, and he almost couldn't help but retched on the spot. He thanked the dog and chirped, and thought about how difficult it was to go from extravagance to frugality. He turned around and said with a smile, "Yeo Shinjun, I just remembered something and I need to chat with you for a few words." Wei Bo smiled awkwardly and said, "Don't worry. Yi Yashinjun and the like don't seem to matter anymore." Xiego said, "Don't delay things that are urgent." Wei Bo sighed quietly in his heart and sat on the steps. "Let's talk about it." What Xiego said next is really not a trivial matter. First he talked about the deal between Jinwu Mountain and Lulu Mountain. This means that Longji Mountain, which is recorded as Jiaoliu Mountain in the secret records of Dali, only has Fengxue Temple. Nod with the Longquan Sword Sect and you will have the opportunity to officially transfer it to the name of Luoluo Mountain. As for the Song family in Dali, I'm afraid Shanjuchen won't open his mouth. Wei Bo understood the idea and asked Fengxue Temple and Ruan Qiong to go and help explain the matter. After that, Luo Pashan had already planned to buy the mountain. In the same way, the one who wanted to facilitate this matter the most was the Great Li dynasty, which was even more anxious than Luo Pashan. When Liju Cave took root, the mountains to the west of the town, including Piyun Mountain, totaled 62. Ever since the Longquan Sword Sect took the initiative to vacate land for Luopa Mountain, there are still about a dozen large and small Xianxia sects that are determined not to move. Wan Qiong is the chief minister of the Great Li dynasty and a guest of 2 generations of emperors of the Song dynasty. Even if he needs to avoid suspicion in this way, he really can't help those dozen sects not thinking too much and not worrying. I really couldn't bear to move away. The piece of fat in my mouth was about to spit out even after I chewed it a few times, and no one wanted to put it away. They are not willing to do a business that will lose money or even lose money, but they are also worried that they are ignorant, have a bad relationship with the behemoth Luoshan, and will be resented. But they didn't have Wan Qiong's identity or Lu Xianying's face, so they could ask Wei Shinjun to personally help move the mountain. Anyone with a discerning eye knows that the Luopa Mountain family is the only one in Zhenchuzu, and there is no room for others to snore on the side of the bed. It is a torrent in the human world and the general trend is inevitable. It is impossible to stop it with a mantis arm acting as a chariot. At that time, Wei Bo moved 7 hills including Xianxia Mountain and purchased them in 2 batches, the first 3 and the last 4. Among the 4 hills in the second time, there was the dojo allocated to Su Xiaoqiao Juhai Peak, formerly known as Jushan. There is also the Yi Peak where the new sect leader Lu Jianxian is stationed. That Qilfish back was leased by Lulu Mountain to Zhuchai Island in black and white. The 2 parties had already concluded an alliance a long time ago. Lu Chongrun, who migrated here from Shujian Lake, was said to have met Master Chen during a time of crisis. Lu Chongrun and the group of female cultivators naturally have no such worries. As for Yidai Peak, which belongs to the Huangliang sect, it also has a very harmonious relationship with Lulu Mountain. There is a girl in a pink skirt who often sends some specialties to the mountain. This treatment is the envy of others. So when Tiaoyu Mountain and Fuyao foothills were acquired by Lulu Mountain, the group of mountain owners who stayed in Hsinchu Prefecture immediately took notice and started asking around for prices. Some of the sects who stayed in Chuzhou have repeatedly communicated with Xiangshan about this matter using flying swords. Everyone is very anxious. You Luopashan have taken the initiative to offer a price and come to talk to us. There was a meeting at the Jisa Peak Ancestral Hall. The mountain owner Qin Pingon wanted to occupy half of the mountain within the next 100 years. In this process of gradually uniting the mountains into one, Lulu Mountain certainly cannot do the kind of forced buying and selling. The price must be fair and everyone will be happy. Xiego said with a serious look. Don't get me wrong, we in Luopa Mountain are serious people. We never bully others. When doing business we should spend money when we should. We will only pay premiums, never discounts. Wei Bo smiled and said, it's not just about money. Xiego said, it is also possible to barter for things and exchange treasures for mountains. The pile of magic weapons and spiritual weapons in Luopa Mountain's treasury can be converted into fairy money. In addition, we can also help find mountains elsewhere. Generally speaking, it's just a transaction method of a sum of fairy money, a few treasures and a piece of mountain top. I'm not afraid of the other party's lion opening his mouth, but he's afraid that the other party won't open his mouth. The mountain master even said that some sects and immortal mansions that have been carefully inspected by the Beiyue Divine Sovereign Mansion to have an innocent background can invite a member of the Jisa Peak Ancestral Master Hall to serve as a guest. In the future, 2 or 3 people can also be sent. If a Taoist embryo enters Tiaoyu Mountain to practice the superior immortal method, no matter how many people there are, it will not work. You must be careful when preaching. How can you be light-hearted when hearing the word Tao? Of course, in this case, the price of the mountain will have to be calculated separately. Wei Bo nodded frequently, but when he heard the superior immortal Dharma, he was inevitably a little confused. What kind of Taoism was going to be taught on Tiaoyu Mountain? Those Tefushan Taoist priests, if they want to copy the Dharma, it may not be suitable. Qin Pingon, who has learned a lot, can indeed choose a few techniques to teach others, but the problem is that Qin Pingon doesn't care at all about the 16 people who jumped into Yushan, whether they were practicing Taoism or martial arts. Instead, they deliberately distanced themselves. However, the old cook also defended the mountain master, saying that he was mindful and not distracted. Xiago smiled and said, "Gone Bing Bang." Before entering the Great Wall of Sword Qi, he still had some good skills at hand. He personally taught them to others. There are no taboos on the mountain. What's more, I also have a few basic introductory techniques. They are the superb chi-refining techniques that those under the earthly immortal dream of. I am not boasting, but they are indeed the most reliable climbing techniques. Just like rice porridge, it nourishes the stomach and nourishes the body. It is very good. Can benefit the soul. The only shortcoming is that the requirements for qualifications are relatively high, and the threshold for practice is not low. That's why I, as a second-rank worshipper, cooperate with Gon Gon. Geniuses have their own cultivation methods and mediocre people have their own methods. A mediocre mountaineering method, haha, if the two work together you can catch them all at once and no one will feel that they are making a profit. Wei Bo smiled and said, "In this case it is not impossible to talk about it. In fact, it may be easier to talk about it after Qin Pingon becomes the national counselor and the Dali court announces the news to Izhou. Of course, buying and selling will still be buying and selling, but it's a bit unkind." Xiago's eyes lit up and he curled his lips. "Yes, that's what I said, but our mountain master doesn't want to discuss business like this, so what can I, the second seat, do?" Wei Bo remembered an explanation and asked with a smile. "By the way, aren't they the 4 giants of Luopa Mountain? How come you have become the 5 giants?" Because of the millet grains, Wei Bo is still very familiar with the current situation of the size of Luopa Mountain. The 4 distinguished high-ranking officials and dignitaries, mountain prime ministers and ministers, are Zhu Xian, Chong Ming, Wei Wenlong and Jiang Shangzhen respectively. Xiago glanced at Wei Bo. Wei Bo was at a loss and confused. Xiago explained in a low voice, "One of the 4 giants is missing a hero behind the scenes. I get angry when I hear it, and the more I think about it, the angrier it becomes. Isn't this just a matter of making an independent decision and adding Yeo Shinjun to the list?" Xiaomili thinks this is an idea. "Very good, I agree and have no objections. Why, Xiaomili hasn't gone to Piyun Mountain to announce the good news to Lord Yiyu yet." Wei Bo kept smiling. "Thank you." Wei Bo thought this statement was funny before, but in the end he was also a joke. The girl in the mink hat waved her hand. "You're welcome, you're so polite. I just have something to ask for, and I'd like to help Wei Shinjun act as a matchmaker." Wei Bo laughed. "Good fellow, are you asking yourself to repay evil with kindness?" Xiago lowered his voice and said, "Thanks to the mountain master for not giving up, I entered the mountain late at night and suddenly became famous and seized a high position. I was worried that I would not be convinced by the crowd, so I worked hard and finally came up with a remedy." Wei Bo's already tense smile became even stiffer. "I was really disgusted by her formal and sour words. Go to with your mother and come here to Fuyao Ludianmeo. Then let Qin Pingon go to Piyun Mountain by himself and talk to me about that matter." Xiago, however, was minding his own business and spoke energetically and made some small calculations. Now the 2 close neighbors of Lulu Mountain, Fiolu and Diaoyu Mountain, have become feudal hills, and only the one a few steps away is left. Tiandu Peak looks a little lonely and pitiful, so I want to buy it secretly without telling the owner of the mountain and my xiaomo. I still understand the rules and etiquette of going up the mountain to ask for woodcutters and entering the water to ask for fishermen." Wei Bo said nothing. Tiandu Peak next door covers a very large area, but is slightly inferior to Lulu Mountain. However, for such a big mountain, there are only a dozen qi practitioners, and there is not even a golden elixir in the mountain. The Xianxia sect of Tiandu Peak, located in the south of Aquarius continent, is not well known and has similar background to the Huangliang sect. There is a Yuanying patriarch who is rumored to have been in seclusion for many years. The current leader is a Jindan Earth Immortal who sits on the top of the mountain. He also has several proud disciples who are said to have the qualifications of an Earth Immortal. Except that the leader is a genuine golden elixir and cannot be faked. The other two statements are either rumors or rumors. Xiego continued. The market situation back then, it is estimated that the Tiandu Peak won't cost more than 10 gold coins. Of course, it has to be calculated according to today's market price. It has to be doubled by 10 times and then multiplied by 500 coins. Is Guyu money enough? Wei Bo said, buyers from Tiandu Peak don't care about money. Regarding the identity of the apparent mountain owner of Tiandu Peak and the real master behind the scenes, it is difficult for Piyun Mountain to reveal the secrets. Qin Pingon also had a tacit understanding and would never embarrass Wei Bo in such matters. Xiego didn't give up yet. Do you not value money at all or don't value money too much? Wei Bo said, from the beginning to the end, they never thought about making a copper coin from Tiandu Peak. Xiego said helplessly, if you don't want to talk about money it will be difficult. It would be different in the wild world. It would be difficult to talk about money if both parties sit down and are willing to talk about it. Wei Bo gave up and said, the ownership of Tiandu Peak can only be discussed after Qin Pingon becomes the greatly imperial master. Xiego was listless and she didn't like the rest of the mountains. Previously there was a foreigner who claimed to be Beng Zhenjuan. He was wealthy and visited many places. He had a well-documented identity as a member of the Tonghis Hao genealogy. He and the 12 sects all made a difficult decision. Although he refused the high price, he was also willing to give a large deposit first, and he could take the deposit as long as he was interested. A money bag fell directly on the table. What was inside was Guyu money. The collapsed true king still vowed that if he regrets one day or even whoever regrets it, the transaction will not be done in a righteous way, and the deposit will not be returned. If you are worried that the Immortal is jumping, you can recruit someone from the Huaihuang County Yahufeng to work as an errand, and both parties will sign a draft contract first. Is there anyone in the world who doesn't treat money as money when doing business? You should be called True Lord Rini, right? But the problem is that if he dares to buy, they may not dare to sell. Once the money and goods are settled and the land title is officially delivered, both parties need to meet with the household department of the Dali Imperial Court. If someone changes hands and sells the mountain top at a high price, and the Real King collapses and starts acting like a monster. If anything goes wrong or causes trouble, don't go to without a big bag of fairy money. Shan apologized or went to the Ministry of Punishment of Dali to explain the matter. Another example is that the so-called Tonghis Hao buyer is actually the money bag of a mountain monk. Because he got some gossip in advance, he wants to buy the mountain at a low price first, and then go to Luoluo Mountain with Qin. The owner of the mountain is making gongs and drums in front of him, asking for a price? Everyone is speculating, could it be an act of venting anger by a certain old swordsman from Xingyang Mountain? You asked us to erect a monument on the border and we bought a hill next to your house, deliberately disgusting Luolu Mountain? Could it be that the Fu family of Lialongqing spent a lot of money to open a way, hoping to use this to ease the relationship with Master Qin? Regardless of the differing opinions from the outside world, Chief Zhou's sincere move to spend money was quickly temporarily stopped by the mountain owner. As a result, those sects that chose to wait and see and forfeit the deposit at that time regretted it more. Those who received the money also had uneasy consciences. After all, Luolu Mountain now has a subordinate sect, and the Qingping Sword sect has also separated many members of the Jisa Peak Ancestral Master Hall, and announced that the mountain will be closed for 20 years. The matter of unifying the mountains cannot be done accurately. Except for Master Qin, who knows it well, it is difficult to say for the time being whether the mountains to the west will all fall under the Qin family. Xiego said casually, I think the Longquan sword sect that has moved away is quite powerful. I hope it will be no less powerful than the 5 mountains. On the Longquan sword sect side, Ruan Qiong, as the last saint in Lizhu Cave Heaven, was the first to choose Xinxiu Mountain, Dianding Mountain and Hengshan Peak. Later 4 more hills were purchased, 3 for his 3 direct disciples, Donggu, Su Xiaoqiao and Xieling, and 1 Yui Peak was reserved for Lu Xianyang, who temporarily borrowed the Qin Confucian Qin family. Wei Bo nodded and said, "The first disciple Dong Gu can survive the Jade Pure Realm. Su Xiaoqiao has no chance. She can occupy Boiled Sea Peak, which is the opportunity to practice Taoism." That long-browed child with deep blessings first went into seclusion to enter the upper 5 realms, and then came out of seclusion. Not long after, with the help of the exquisite pagoda of immortal weapon rank, there was another method of enlightenment in the rain. By sacrificing that treasure, you can intercept the merits from the rain naturally, just like the patio over there in the town. Si Shui Gui Tang actually opened a single channel as a ditch to divert water into his home. Maybe he will become an immortal earlier than Lu Xianyang. Wei Bo had a very good relationship with the 2 sect leaders Yuan Qiong and Lu Xianyang. Even Qin Pingon didn't know about it. Yuan Qiong often invited Wei Bo to drink with Longquan Sword sect in private. Their relationship was unusual. So when Wei Bo talked about these inside stories, it was almost like chatting about family matters. What's more, the relationship between Lu Xianyang and Qin Pingon has been known to everyone in the continent for a long time. Xiago smiled and said, "Xie Ling's final great achievement is definitely far behind Lu Xianyang." Wei Bo said, "This is just the opinion of a small group of people on the top of the mountain. After ascending, it seems to be nothing. In Aquarius continent before Jiazi, let alone one more immortal, there were people who reached the Yupu realm. Are all great things?" Xiago suddenly asked, "Did the dragon-slaying battle be caused by Old Man Yang from the drug store? Qin Qinglu and him were in the dark and bright and they were intertwined." Note 1. Wei Bo was silent for a moment and said, "The deceased has passed away. It is a taboo of the venerable person, so we won't talk about it anymore." Xiego said helplessly, "You are the only ones who have more rules." Wei Bo smiled, "Just get used to it. Old Man Yang is not only one of the 12 high-ranking gods, but also the ancestor of the male Earth Immortal who controls an ascension platform. So one can imagine his attitude towards the true dragon who betrayed the ancient heaven. When planning on the mountain, one always likes to draw a line of grass and snakes, stretching for thousands of miles, hiding murderous intent. A group of famous mountains in the ancient Shu territory were gathered and moved to the place where the real dragon fell, and they became the mountains in the west today. Chunyang Lu Yen, who himself is a page in the old almanac, once solved Qin Pingan's doubts. He recalled that when Qin Qinglu was born out of nowhere, the cave where he made swords in ancient times was named Kuokang. Note 2. The bamboo house and the corridor outside the door seem to be close at hand, but in fact they are worlds apart. Before Wei Bo returned to Piyun Mountain, he said one more thing. It was the suggestion given by Emperor Dali himself. The imperial court will bring out 5 bags of 5-color soil as one of the gifts for Qin Pingon to be the national master. Wei Shanjun, after receiving the news, His Majesty the Emperor held a special meeting in the imperial study room. They all felt that there was no problem. However, His Majesty the Emperor did not put forward any hard requirements regarding the weight of a bag of 5-color soil. Anyway, Tong Shanjun had already asked someone to give a bag of 5-color soil. The 5-color soil was handed over to the Dali Ministry of Rites. It was a big deal. If it were me, I wouldn't be willing to take out so much in one go. No wonder Jin Qing muttered a few words and asked if he had made an appointment with Shanju Chen in advance. I deliberately asked Mr. Tong to help drive up prices. Master Qin Shanju in the room follows the ordinary cultivation path of combining the 5 elements and natal objects. Many years ago, thanks to the help of his student Cui Dongshan, he got 5 bags of soil. But at that time the quality of the 5-color soil was not very high. Each of the 5 mountains in Aquarius Island naturally has one of the 5-colored soils. When Wei Bo and the others rose from the status of kings of a country to kings of a continent, they were promoted to kings of gods. The quality of the 5-color soil has risen with the rising tide. Xiego smiled and said, "This emperor is quite shrewd and knows how to live a good life. This is clearly a generosity to others. Why doesn't he take out a pile of gold and copper coins from the treasury?" Wei Bo hesitated to speak. After much deliberation, he finally opened the skylight and said something clear. "His Majesty the Emperor has hinted to me that when your mountain master takes over the post of imperial preceptor, there will be treasures stored in several secret vaults in Dali, and the new imperial preceptor will be allowed to do whatever he wants." Xiego's eyes lit up. He let out a cry and rubbed his hands and said, "He is a great talent and a good man. He is so close to each other. Does the Song family of Dali still lack the support of the royal family?" I rushed to the late gathering and cannot be the chief. You can be a second seat. Wei Bo smiled and asked, seriously? Xiego said tentatively, Mr. Wei, we are in the same group. You can't help outsiders deceive your own people. Wei Bo laughed and said, if Miss Xie doesn't want to take it seriously, forget it. I have nothing to do to chat about Weiss Night Tour, but I have something to discuss with Mr. Wei. You Luo Luoshan, you have such a good atmosphere, each and every one of you doesn't know who you learned this bad habit from. Xiego urged, Brother Wei, what are you going to say? Can you give me the right words? Wei Bo let out a sigh. His figure was actually unstable. Not only was the bamboo corridor under his feet like soft mud. It seems that the entire Fuyao foothills is as erratic as a thin piece of paper. It's just that this extraordinary vision disappeared in a flash. On the other hand, the girl in the mink hat lightly stamped her feet to help dispel the ripples of Taoism, as if she had long been accustomed to it. Wei Bo asked in his heart, this is it. Xiego grinned and answered with just one word from his heart, Tao. Note 1, Chapter 993, How Beautiful the Mountains. Note 2, Chapter 985, Closed Disciple. Sword of Coming. Chapter 1241. Chapter 1241. Asking Jian by Yujing successively. The bamboo house is separated from the corridor by a wall, which is a unique cave. The room was like a vast ethereal realm. Qin Pingon closed his eyes and rested, sitting cross-legged. A severely damaged bright red robe and 2 broken swords hung in front of him. This is the price that Qin Pingon and Ma Kushuan must pay for a life-and-death battle. On the robe that Qin Pingon had transformed into when he entered the Immortal realm, there were many Zhuan characters of different colors and shades, ready to move as if they wanted to break out of the cage. These great demons' true names, which were sewn onto Qin Pingan's body with secret techniques by sewing men in prison, were woven together like a large piece of duckweed with roots, swaying gently with the water. The root of these duckweeds is Qin Pingan, who is in harmony with half of the Sword Qi Great Wall. The darker the color of the demonic characters, the larger the ripples in the robe that are pulled out, indicating that they are either ascending or becoming immortals. As for the real name of the Jade Pu Realm Monster Clan, let's just lie down. No matter how hard the water plants embedded in the robe struggled, they still couldn't move. Qin Pingan is already in the Immortal realm. Unless they get a great opportunity, they will not be able to break through the invisible barrier that is one of the manifestations of this great avenue. This illusory will always exist in a way similar to Dao Hen. It's not that with this kind of restraint and the existence of this Tianmen Pass, Qin Pingan can directly decide whether the big demon breaks through on the path of cultivation, but Qin Pingan can at least rely on the strength of these real names to infer that the demon clan, the monk's current realm, depth of cultivation, and even the quality of his qualifications. This can probably be regarded as the reward for Qin Pingan's hard work in Hedao, half of the Sword Qi Great Wall. Qin Pingan, in white with pure golden eyes, wearing a Taoist crown, floated back from a very far distance. The style of the Taoist crown was probably the one he had seen on the golden crown of Fuyao Continent's New Ascension Shujuan Wangjia. On his head this crown also changed from a lotus crown to a more arrogant style, and was also named Yujing Mountain. Qin Pingan gave the other party a certain degree of freedom, and was mainly responsible for protecting Taoist Ding and observing Taoism. Qin Pingan's true form did not open his eyes, frowning slightly and said, "This is the initial stage of just slicing Hongmeng and creating the world. You are far from being lazy yet." Dao Guan Qin Pingan squatted next to the Broken Sword Night Tour. The old saying that everything is difficult at the beginning does not apply here. Don't worry, I am not qualified to say anything about being a person, but when it comes to doing things, I am definitely more reliable than you. Qin Pingan said nothing. Dao Guan Qin Pingan smiled and said, "Between the 9 and 10 realms of a pure martial artist, you need to hit the Tianmen. In the same way, today's wild immortal Yupu who carries the true name, will also need to communicate with you in the future when they realize the Dao and ascend. Say hello." Qin Pingan said, "In prison I once asked Nian Exen when it would really play a substantial role. Nian Xin's answer was the Ascension Realm." At that time Qin Pingan felt that he was too far away from the Ascension Realm. Once you reach the Ascension Realm you can stumble upon them on the road. This situation is a bit similar to someone from the 14th level of Sneaky, who forcibly interrupted Qin Pingan's sword refining 3 times. Even Bai Jing, who was helping to protect the way, could only stare. That kind of sneaky trick can't kill Qin Pingon, who has a strong body and a stable soul. It can also disgust Qin Pingon, who has finally been in seclusion for just one time and has hit a wall everywhere. The key is that Qin Pingon is still not sure whether the other party will do it for the fourth time. This is why we must guard against thieves for 1,000 days. Daoguan Qin Pingon said angrily, "How come you stripped me of such insignificant and trivial memories?" Qin Pingon placed his hands on his abdomen and took a long breath. Every time he breathed out, a gorgeous and bright star river would appear in the boundless void, and at the same time, a large sea of stars would disappear, and the cycle continued with endless birth and death. Daoguan Qin Pingon sat on the long sword that he had pieced together temporarily. When I reach the Ascension realm one day, it will be a little interesting at most but not very meaningful. At most it will be a sneaky stumbling block using methods from a distance to disturb the mind. Delaying the retreat of a demon monk, and worrying that an accident will turn out to be a good thing in helping them sharpen their Taoist mind, isn't it a waste of time? So, only when you become a 14th realm will it become both interesting and meaningful. This statement may not be accurate. Whether we can reach the Ascension realm depends on the effect of this Taoist contemplation first. We need Taoist Ding to help us verify whether this ascension method is feasible or not. The matter of combining Taoism is in the year of the monkey and the moon in the horse. God knows what the structure of the world was like at that time. 100 years later, even the 14th realm monks are not worth much after all. The world may have been destroyed, or maybe everything will be peaceful. But don't we worked hard and talked together, but the plate of day lilies on the table was cold. Qin Ping's arrangement turned a deaf ear. Daoguan Qin Pingon shook his sleeves, raised his arms, put his fingers together, and pointed at the true name of a big demon on the broken robe. The real name of the Immortal Realm Demon Clan was gently pressed down, as if he were lying on the ground, with a dent in his bright red robe. On the other side of the wild world, a great demon immortal king who was having a banquet with distinguished guests in his own dojo suddenly felt depressed and his Taoist heart was shaken. It immediately ordered the opening of the mountain protecting formation, and without hesitation sacrificed the two half-immortal weapons. It used its magical power to carefully inspect the territory under its jurisdiction in a therm-like manner. After a banquet full of guests, it was so exciting that the Immortal Lord began to personally check whether there were any spies hiding at the banquet. Daoguan Qin Pingon smiled and said, "As long as you reach the 14th realm, even if you are separated by a world, you will still kill after ascending. Besides, with my help, it will be very simple to find the whereabouts of the Ascension realm in the future. Don't you yearn for the private sword style of the Great Wall of Sword Qi in the past? Of course we can also learn from it and secretly go to the wilderness. Along the way kill the upper 5 realms and the 14th realm and below, including Feishing, all the way through, killing a bunch of them one by one." Qin Pingon still closed his eyes and said calmly, "I just ate a watermelon and it made you bloated?" Qin Pingon, the Taoist priest, choked on his words and was depressed for a long time. He held the back of his head with both hands, shook the Taoist crown above his head and laughed at himself. "You are so cruel to yourself." Qin Pingon smiled and said, "It's the other way around. I've always been lenient to myself and strict to others." Daoguan Qin Pingon wants to go back. That is a juvenile book carefully compiled for Taoist Ding. The preface and opening chapter are quite good. Unexpectedly, Qin Pingon opened his eyes and said, "Idle time is also idle. Help me do 2 serious things." Being connected with each other, the Taoist man in white clothes was naturally unable to avoid and had no way to escape, so he had no choice but to jump off the broken sword and wave his sleeves. A towering Dharma image appeared in the realm of Taishu, making the 2 Qin Pingon look as small as mustard seeds. The hair, nails, skin, flesh and blood and tendons of the statue were all removed one by one, leaving only a frame of white bones, countless meridians and the Qi mansion as the connecting point. Qin Pingon showed this kind of hanging image, astrological and celestial diagram twice. Once he gave instructions on boxing techniques to his close disciple Zhou Xian, teaching him how to use a breath of pure Qi to move like a fire dragon through water, using a more intuitive way. Method is called martial arts, so where is the path? Explained to Zhou Xian what happened. One time was at Demugwen in Lotus Root Blessed Land, where I preached to the local Qi practitioners and martial artists. It was like opening up a magnificent picture of mountains and rivers for both of them. It was no longer the situation at the bottom of a well where you couldn't see your fingers, no matter whether you were practicing martial arts. It's better to practice qi and you can avoid many detours. In the eyes of the qi practitioners of Blessed Land at that time, there were different speculations and explorations about the number of human qi palaces. Sun Wanyan, who had good Taoist qualifications, only dared to rely on the number of 300 or 400, but at that time Shan Zhuchen shook his head. The hanging portrait that came out showed that there were more than 1,000 human and qi palaces scattered throughout the place, and the atmosphere was severe. Taoist priest Qin Pingon raised his head and looked at the Dharma image with golden light in his body. The human body is a small world, and each qi mansion is both a fairy and a Taoist temple. He raised his sleeves and pointed, "Aren't you idle? Can gold and copper coins be used in this way? Every gold and copper coin is a talisman boat anchored across the sea." It turns out that the number of qi palaces in this image is significantly greater than that of the two previously disclosed hanging images, at least 400 more. According to Jing Zhezhong's deduction, the number Qin Pingon needed to improve the moon rank in Fujianjing happened to be no more than 1,500. Fuyazi Lao Feixing Yang Qinggu said he was a ghost and was afraid of Jing Chuzhong. Indeed, this kind of awe is not superfluous at all. The wooden figurine that your neighbor Wang Zhu chopped up intentionally and gave to you as a scrap was the first time you came into contact with human acupuncture points. The key was thrown away by Song Jisun back then, but the wooden figurine was kept by Zhigui. Either are two awkward neighbors. While traveling, I intended to purchase various medical books from the markets at the foot of the mountain. Together with the Taoist secrets collected from the mountain along the way, I gradually accumulated the number of qi mansions I knew to 700. By looking through the secret files of the Summer Palace, browsing the collection of books in the Merit Forest of the Confucian Temple, and writing down in detail those secret realms that have been verified as tasteless by the predecessors of qi refiners, or are regarded as secrets that are not passed down by many immortal sections. And what was lost has been greatly harvested. In fact, at this point, you have obtained the accurate identification of nearly 1,060 qi palaces. Right? Lu Qin borrowed Taoism for a while and you dug up your own world, testifying and denying those useless things respectively, and there were additional quantitative benefits. In addition, you traveled to the outer world with her. This is an achievement that I can boast about. I guess even if Zhou Xian knows about it, he will be surprised again and say more to fellow Daoist Chen. I have promised to treat others with sincerity. I don't want to tell Sun Wanyan and the others the location of the Qi Palace, so that's it. After all, they are outsiders. They know too much, which is not good. When they leave the Blessed Land and travel outside, it will be a big deal. Variables. But why did you even lie to the closed disciple Zhao Xuxia? Having said this, Tao Guanchen Pingon sighed. Why should you deceive yourself and forget deliberately? Do you really have to separate to me by saying I have been with you for a long time? I can't blame Qin Qinglu, a bystander, for saying that you are a poor guy. Qin Pingon said, so talkative. The man wearing the Taoist crown smiled and said, you are always a talker. Once a mountain murmured to itself, but the mountains did not respond. The voice will become lower and lower, and the voice of the heart will become smaller and smaller with age. Believe me, if you have been talking all the time when you were young, if someone walks with you at night, you will be a chatty person who will definitely annoy that person. Qin Pingon laughed it off, stood up and looked up at the ethereal Dharma statue as high as a mountain. 1,500 gold and copper coins shining like stars were divided into a palace of human body and energy. Among them are the 5 natal qi palaces containing the great refining objects. The scene is clear and vivid. Beyond this, there are even more great things. But there is another serious thing that is relatively interesting. Qin Pingon asked the Taoist master to create 2 Qin Pingon, one true and one false. The real one is Qin Pingon at this moment, and the fake one is Qin Pingon who has had his talisman removed. The two sides faced each other and fought each other. There is no doubt that the former one winning the next first-class authentic work. Qin Pingon shook his head, still dissatisfied, and planned to make the disparity in strength between the two sides even greater. Then remove all the magic weapons and foreign objects, and eliminate all the memories of magic and supernatural powers related to them. The former used a crushing attitude to easily kill the latter, defeating Qin Pingon, who looked almost like a fake. Qin Pingon continued, remove the latter's identity as a martial artist. The Taoist priest shook his head and said helplessly, it's meaningless. Qin Pingon thought for a moment and said, Then remove half of each and only retain the identities of sword cultivator and martial artist, to keep purity against purity. The Taoist priest smiled and said, "That's right." While Qin Pingon was watching the battle intently, he took out a treasure from his sleeve, which was a dark green magical knife obtained from the immortal Han Yushu. This object has a great origin. It was obtained from Xianxia cave by the founder of Wanyao sect. Note 1. The Taoist crown master glanced at the magical sword that even Han Yushu couldn't refine, and noticed a certain thought in the real body and asked curiously, "Isn't that the case?" Qin Pingon said, "As for it, you have to give it a try before you know whether it's successful or not." The Taoist champion reminded, "Once you choose to take this path as a key auxiliary means of Hadao, it will be time-consuming, energy-consuming, money-consuming, and there is no turning back. If it fails, the loss will be too great." Qin Pingon had a smile on his face and his eyebrows were flying. "On this road we must proceed step by step and make constant corrections. What if it works? If it doesn't work, let's just set off a bunch of firecrackers during the new year." The Taoist priest reached out and rubbed his cheek. "This is too extravagant. One day when the opportunity comes in a small world of one's own." The people of heaven and earth chirped together, and the spring thunder exploded in the world. The Taoist master also laughed. "Just thinking about it makes me feel very happy. Then go to hell, I don't care whether it succeeds or not." Qin Pingan's expression returned to normal and he said calmly, "A Taoist should have this intention. When I was in prison, I made a deal with the white-haired boy who liked to call himself Frost Sheng at that time, and the total price was 1 grain rain coin. As long as the white-haired boy could earn 10 grains from himself based on his ability. For a small sum of money, Qin Pingon was willing to help the boss Zhou Xian to soothe his cheeks, so that the white-haired boy would have a chance to regain his freedom. One of the little summer coins earned from the ancestor Yin Guan, the white-haired boy helped Qin Pingon find the 6 mountains of princes leading to the 10 natal Chifu avenues. At that time, Qin Pingon was about to break through and enter the cave realm, and finally had the opportunity to become the middle 5 realm god he had longed for. The white-haired boy said that the opportunity should not be missed and would not come back again, so he struck while the iron was hot. When he opened the mansion, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth poured into his body. Qin Pingan's mind was just able to use the mysterious method of carving a boat to find a sword, to determine the accuracy of the 6 Crown Prince Hills. Earlier, when he and Lu Tai traveled to Tongyi's Hao, Lu Tai told Qin Pingon, a layman, a lot of inside information about the mountain and the ways of cultivation. In fact, the more natal objects of a Taoist cultivator, the better. Those who are qualified to pursue the realm of the more the merrier are the geniuses among geniuses. Floor materials are not qualified to say this, only heavenly materials are. If we say that those who practice Taoism can be considered the lucky ones who receive food from God, then what Lu Tai calls his talent is not God giving him a bowl, but a big pot and a dining table. As for this kind of person who is rarely seen all over the world, far away in the world, there is a talisman player in the divine continent of the Middle Earth. There is a person named Wei in the Ai continent, and as for those close to us by coincidence there are 2 of them. At that time Qin Pingon looked at the guy with a joking smile on his face and thought that Lu Tai was a fool saying stupid things, so naturally he didn't take it seriously. The Taoist champion said, "Lu Tai and the others have appeared on the Sword Qi Great Wall. There are not many people, only a handful, but among the team, there are people who are the same as the colorful World Lantern Festival." Qin Pingon smiled and said, "I have too much time to take care of myself, so I won't worry about it." The Taoist master said, "The Book of Taoist Ding will soon be turned into the 2nd chapter. Qin Pingon said, "A Tianhuang nobleman who was wandering in the market went through ups and downs, suffered a lot of contempt, met a strange person, fell in love with the young man and began to embark on the path of monasticism. Tell it for yourself, this opening chapter, is it vulgar?" The Taoist master sighed in a tone of imitation and said, "The vulgarity is the elegance. I think the beginning of this story is very exciting." Qin Pingon glanced at the Taoist champion. The latter insisted on his own opinion. Qin Pingon had no choice but to give in and said, "Join me and Xiangtong on those landscape travels. Remember the plot twists. Don't be too rigid. In the end, the protagonist will appear to protagonist." The Taoist priest said with astonishment on his face, "You even copied your own books? That's not good." It seems that you don't have enough academic ability and talent. Qin Pingon remained silent and stared at the Dharma image again, making a decision in his heart. The Taoist priest had no choice but to raise his hands and said, "Everyone go about your business?" Qin Pingon nodded, sat down again, closed his eyes and rested his mind, folded his hands and touched his thumbs. The Dharma image was not removed. Those who live in the mountains and practice Taoism spend their time and thoughts unaware of the changes in the weather outside the mountains as the sun rises and the moon sets. According to the white-haired boy, the 356 acupoints in the human body are equivalent to 365 ready-made caves in heavens. A person brings it from his mother's womb. This is the reason why all the monsters in the world have to cultivate the human form. That's why Qin Pingon had such heartfelt emotion when he was in Ma Mansion with Yu Shiwu earlier. Human life is rare in our generation and it's hard to get another human life. At that time when he was in prison and asked to sew his real name with twisting cores, Qin Pingon was of low status and the number of mansions he opened was extremely limited. There were only 10 orifices to open the mansion. At that time each of the 5 elements' natal objects occupied one, and there were 2 more caged birds and wells. At the end of the month, the natal flying swords, the 2 flying swords on the 1st and 15th day of the month, which have never been refined into their natal objects, must have a place to live. In addition, the imitation swords Pine Needle and Kulei must be together in one house. At that time Qin Pingon didn't have any extra chi palace to put them aside, let alone Zhou Xian. The scale of his enlightenment back then was also due to the 3 rays of sword energy he received when he was young, which helped him open up mountains and build a mansion early. Otherwise, Qin Pingon will only be more stretched and unable to start. As for refining some external spiritual weapons and magic weapons into natal objects, Qin Pingon has never thought about it. You don't have to spend money to refine things on the mountain. I have no money. What's more, not all spiritual treasures are suitable for intermediate and advanced refining. In history there were often great monks who stared at an immortal weapon for hundreds of years, but still couldn't figure it out or couldn't break through the layers of restrictions, or it is a person who is not compatible with the supreme treasure so he can only part with it and pass it on to a direct descendant or his own disciple. Today is different from the past. On this day the Taoist priest came here again to visit the scene and was amazed. As expected of me, this is such a generous act. What the eyes see is both high and deep. The found 10 mountains of princes have all been refined into natal objects by Qin Pingon's true body. They are like dispatching troops and punishing generals. They sit in the mansion and match the 5 elements of natal objects. They have the attribute of 1 master and 2 slaves. The former is very important to them. The latter has examples of rewards, and the latter and the former have the obligation to pay tribute. The imitation swords purchased from Hinjian Mountain in Luzhou, Beiju, were all refined by Qin Pingon. It's not a small refining, it goes directly to the middle refining level, and the big refining becomes a natal thing that is closely related to the Great Road. In addition, there is a natal flying sword, Tian Lai, from the sword cultivator of the demon clan of the Zhengrong sect. The white-haired boy gave him a short sword engraved with the word, sacrifice. I want both the quantity of the Qi mansion and the quality of the dojo. Too much to bite off? In the realm of immortals, Qin Pingon wanted to do the opposite. Very wild. Qin Pingon ignored the arrival of the Taoist priest and continued to sit on the Taoist corpse. Like in a niche. Everything that is small and close to you is placed at your feet. It is obvious that after refining things together the real body will take shape. From Bao Fengzai who left his hometown, to Master Yinguan who kept it up when he saw the opportunity, and then to Qin Jianxian, he still managed to save some wealth during his travels and monastic life. The Taoist priest clasped his hands behind his back and walked slowly, always looking up at the Dharma image. I saw a water seal in the natal water palace, slowly rotating, and there was a deep pool below with shadows like a dragon swimming around. There are 3 walls in the mansion and a number of water gods and Narcissus are lifelike. In another natal chi palace on the top of the mountain temple, there is a crystal-clear imitation white jade pagoda with grand Tao Chi. In a deep aura surrounded by white mist, there stood a sword fairy banner, making a sound and shining brightly. In a newly opened chi mansion, a floating white jade Ganoderma lucidum trailed a rainbow light. A 6-sided seal that contains the true meaning of the thunder method and forms the world of thunder hangs in the sky, with lightning and thunder, like a driving thousands of golden whips at the same time, constantly whipping and consolidating the entire land of Qi Mansion. There are also many robes of different grades that are also refined. Some are as big as the sky, some cover mountains and rivers, and those of lower grades are like a sea of clouds and mayflies between heaven and earth. Old Man Yang once asked Chen Pingon, "Are you full?" The answer is no. Chai Wu was Wei Xian's apprentice. Wei Xian was addicted to officialdom and followed the great Li cavalry to the wild world to accumulate military merit, so he left the little girl here. Since Wei Haiyang said that her qualifications were as good as his own ability to drink, Chai Wu had a better idea of his martial arts talent. In addition, something happened later which made Chai Wu even more aware. The legendary Master Chen, it is said, could not even teach boxing to his original disciples, let alone help others preach. But Shanzhu Chen, who never easily gave advice to others on how to practice, actually preached to her personally and solved her doubts. The result was quite unexpected. Anyway, it was almost like a chicken talking to a duck playing the piano to an ox. Chai Wu knew that he was indeed lucky and could practice immortal magic, but only can. So when she was in the Changchun cave in Mixiefeng from the Lujin realm, where there was a saying about Lu Ren realm, to the Yupu realm, Chai Wu was actually more enlightened and stunned than anyone else. But she quickly figured out that it must be thanks to the natal flying sword presented by Mr. Xiaoma. Moreover, those who congratulated her were actually those of the same age. Sect Master Cui showed up once and said some strange words. The general meaning was to praise her for her good aptitude. Now she is a sword cultivator in the 5th realm. Are you interested in calling her master? Switch to Qingping Sword Sect. Every fairy, whether cross-continental or short distance, needs a sea trial. Chai Wu took the Thundercar ferry that Yao from Daquan sent to King Shandu, and followed the steward Jiao Lao Shenxian back to his hometown in the north. But Chai Wu didn't go to the sword worship platform, and he was really annoyed with Bai Xian. She didn't go to Lulu Mountain either, mainly because she was afraid of the second worshipper named Xiago. Because it was said that she and Mr. Xiaomo were Taoist companions, the little girl felt a little guilty, so she hid on the ferry and went to Lulu Mountain or Qilong Lane, which could last as many days as possible. In fact, it's not hiding. Chai Wu likes fairies and the high above feeling. As a result, when all the thunder trucks returned from Beiju Luzhou, Chai Wu thought it would be better to postpone it for a few more days, go to Tongyi's house and come back next time. As a result, Zhang Lu came to Nujiadu, showed up on the ferry, and told the little girl that Xiago had asked her to go to Fiolu to have a few words with her. Chai Wu had a grimace and didn't dare to refuse. When we arrived at the mountain master's private ashram at the foot of Fuyao, it was a place with such beautiful scenery that it's hard to describe it, and it was also a very weird place. In Chai Wu's field of vision, all the scenes were distorted by light, but you had to look carefully to find the traces. Just like everything in the world is made up of billions of tiny silk threads, perhaps when the mountain wind blows, the threads will sway slightly. Xiago leaned against the wall of the corridor and squinted at the little girl in the Jade Pure realm. Is this little girl the one who got the natal flying sword that her own Xiaomo peeled off? Chongqing nodded to the second worshipper, and the little girl had already helped bring him there. Xiago clasped his fists in salute. The smiling woman in long robes, Zhang Lu, was a senior official. Chongming touched Chai Wu's head and said softly, "Don't be nervous when you see your family offering sacrifices." Chai Wu shrank his neck. Changming took out 2 bags from his sleeves and placed them in the corridor. Xiago asked, "What to do?" Chongqing smiled and said, "A little gold and copper coins just in case of emergencies." Xiago frowned. Chongqing explained, "Don't worry, no capital has been used." Xiago nodded. Indeed, Luo Shan doesn't like the "what do I think," and "am doing it for your own good" stuff. When Zhang Lu left the mountains, Xiago asked, "Can I drink?" Chai Wu blushed and said honestly, "No matter what happens, I will drink some." Xiago waved and said, "This is a good relationship. Let's have a few drinks and warm up our relationship." Chai Wu sat on the steps, took off his boots and sat opposite the girl in the mink hat. There were 2 pots of wine and 2 large white bowls in the middle of the corridor. Before drinking, Xiago asked, "Can you see the difference here?" Chai Wu looked solemn and said, "What do you mean by different?" Xiago asked, "What do you think?" Chai Wu was sweating on his forehead. Xiago smiled and stretched out his hand to signal, "Stop sitting around and start drinking." They each poured wine in a decent manner and the wine bowls clinked together. I originally wanted to take a sip of chai wu, but when the other person raised his head he drank it all in one gulp, and the little girl had no choice but to do the same. Xiego wiped his mouth and asked, "Little girl Pianzi, do you know what sort cultivation is?" Chai wu looked confused. "I have only been practicing Taoism for a few days, how can I answer this kind of question?" Xiego then changed the topic and repeated the content of the spell given to the 8 cultivators at Taoyu Mountain Huayin Peak. "Do you understand?" Chai wu nodded and said, "I understand." Xiego asked, "Can you learn it?" After a while Chai wu nodded and said, "Barely." What Xiego saw in his eyes was the atmosphere in Chewa's small world. He had to admit that this reluctance was very reluctant. "In fact, I have learned everything. Let's just say it's not that there is anything wrong with my own preaching, it's that those students who are lucky enough to hear the word but don't understand it don't help." Xiego filled another bowl of wine, stretched out his thumb and exclaimed, "Wow, it turns out to be a small Bai Jing. The materials of the earth are compared to the immortals of the earth, and the materials of the sky are compared to the immortals of heaven. This is the simplest calculation method in the ancient times. In terms of talent and basic skills, in Xiego's opinion, after seeing Luo Shan and Qingping sword sect, among the younger generation Chao Qinglang and Bai Xian were almost boring. Xiego now wonders if the little girl named Sun Chunwang will give him any surprises. Probably, as Wei Bo said, in the eyes of her small group of monks on the mountain top. It was just like that after ascending. If it were one level higher, wouldn't the older generation of 14th realm monks treat the new group of Taoists who emerged in this world the same way? Xiego smiled and said, "Our mountain master has made a lot of money. No wonder he can't teach you Taoism." Chai Wu blinked his eyes as if in disbelief, and the little girl quickly lowered her head to drink. Xiego narrowed his eyes and said, "Little girl, why do you have to pretend to be stupid every day and deceive yourself and others? Do you just distrust this world? You're already in the Jade Pu realm. It has been so long and you still haven't recovered?" Chai Wu hesitated for a moment, then raised his head, his eyes bright. Xiego said, "Smartness can lead to mistakes. Can you fool fools like Bai Xian and Mi Zhenxian? Can you fool Cui Dongshan, our Lord Qin?" Chai Wu wanted to speak but stopped. Xiego asked, "You like hiding on the ferry so much, do you think the farther and higher away from the ground the better?" Since Chai Wu and Xiao Imo have a close relationship, and Xiego and Xiao Imo are a match made in heaven, and they will be married tomorrow. So regarding Chai Wu's experiences when she was young, how did she relate to her? Chen Pingon, whom Wei Xian knew, told Xiego about the general situation. When she was 4 years old, a little girl with a miserable life experience was hidden in a large dilapidated tomb in a hanging basket by her fleeing parents. The basket contained all the food they had left. Note 2. Chai Wu finished the wine in the bowl, raised his arm and wiped the corners of his mouth. The little girl raised her head, put her hand between her eyebrows, looked calm and nodded, "I think the world is high." Xiego smiled, showing neither pity nor surprise. He just raised the wine bowl and said, "Take one." Chai Wu poured a bowl of wine and said with a shy face, "I drank too fast. I'm afraid I'll talk drunkenly later and go crazy." Xiego said, "Then just take a sip." Chai Wu said, "Okay." Xiego suddenly asked, "Why don't you worship me as your teacher?" Chai Wu shook his head, "I have a master." Xiego learned from his own mountain master and sighed, "You can't understand wine anymore, you're not sensible." Chai Wu's eyes were firm. Xiego obviously had something in mind and said, "You can accept Wei Haoyang as your father instead of kissing him? Why don't you accept me as your master?" Chai Wu was stunned on the spot. Could he still do this? 2 visitors arrived who should not appear in the Lulu Mountain realm. A stern young man and a thick-browed young man, they are both direct disciples of Ma Kushuan. Before, they stayed at the top of Xiao Mountain, near the temple of the mountain goddess Empress, watching the movements in the capital city of Yushuan Kingdom from a distance. A white-haired boy appeared out of nowhere and asked them if they wanted to climb a mountain. If they wanted to climb a mountain, they would have to register their names. The young man claimed that his name and Taoist name were both Wangzhu. He was not going to climb the mountain today. He was just looking for someone, your mountain master Chen Pingon. The young man with a hatchet on his waist said that his name was Gao Ming, and asked the short winter melon who said he was a genealogy compiler. If he didn't climb mountains, could he also be named? The white-haired boy said that there was no such rule. He then asked Gao Ming about his current state. When he heard that he was in the fifth state, he lost interest. If it was a rare chi practitioner in the lower 5 realms, it might be possible to make an exception. The Conscientious Genealogy compiler now has 2 volumes, the first and second volumes. Of course, the main book is about business matters. As for the supplementary book, it is about everything. A rickety old man wearing cloth shoes came from the mountain. When he arrived at the mountain gate, the old man stretched out his hand and motioned to sit down at the table and chat slowly. Seeing that they did not move, Zhou Xian smiled and introduced himself. Zhou Xian, the person in charge of miscellaneous matters in Luopa Mountain. Our mountain master is currently in retreat and cannot entertain guests in person. Wang Zhu said calmly, since he refuses to show up, then we will leave. Gao Ming groaned, obviously unwilling to leave just like that. He had been wandering around this famous Lulu Mountain and the thunderous Master Chen for a long time. The young man really found one thing in common. They all carried hatchets at their waists, so they probably met and chatted. Although Lao Ma has a bad mouth, he still doesn't hesitate to say a few kind words when talking about Chen Pingon. Zhou Xian smiled and said, don't think that our mountain master is arrogant, misunderstanding that he just uses the excuse of seclusion to send you away. To put it bluntly, the number of times I have to go to the mountain gate to greet guests in person is not many. Let's talk to you again. Tell the truth, the mountain master is indeed in seclusion. If not, he would definitely be willing to come here to see you. I have said both the unpleasant and pleasant things. You decide for yourself whether to leave or not. Wang Zhu seemed to be confirming the truth of the old man's words. Gao Ming was a talker and said, regardless of whether it's true or not, to say the least, if a great butler who can take care of everything is willing to come to the bottom of the mountain to fool people like this, it can be regarded as giving us enough face. Doesn't it say Prime Minister in all books? The third-grade concierge, not to mention Zhou Xian, is also a big steward. Senior brother, you only have 2 gold and it's not enough to see you here, so don't be pretentious. Listen to me, don't leave in a hurry, sit down and chat slowly. The so-called 2 gold means that a person is in the gold body state and the gold elixir state at the same time. The last one was Master Wen, who was now a boxing master at Tiaoyu Mountain. Among the large number of letters sent to Jisa Peak Sword Room like snowflakes, one of them came from Tongyi's Hao Jade Guizong, inviting Chen Pingon to participate in the congratulations on Jiaifeng Qiuji's elixir formation celebration. Bai Xian's hero book was described by Jing Dafeng as a book of life and death, but the old cook said it was an ironclad edict on clothes and belts. Among the famous people on the list is the genius swordsman of Ji Peak and Qiuji, his peer with whom Bai Xian met at Qingping Peak. There are also 2 generals, Taihui Jianzong of Luzhou in Beiju and Pianran Fengfeng with white heads, who can take the rear. When Jingqing from Lingfei Palace in Aquarius Continent can be a pioneer. Bai Xian himself drooled over this hero book every day and felt that the lineup he had worked so hard to put together was terrifyingly powerful. Wang Zhu said, I came here with my junior brother this time. Gao Ming said from his heart, Lao Ma told me the name of a person. He said that as long as he takes the initiative to come to Lulu Mountain and tells Chen Pingon, there will be a big opportunity waiting for me. Chen Pingon will definitely not let me go in vain. One trip. Zhou Xian nodded, gathered his voice and whispered to them, Master Gao Xian can either find a place to live in the town and wait for now. When our mountain master comes out of seclusion, I will inform you. Or tell me if you know that name. I will tell the mountain master later that Master Gao will leave you an address and the mountain master will find you. Wang Zhu asked doubtfully, why don't you ask where the Shudian went? Aquarius Island knew that there were many people who had a maid and 2 apprentices around Makushuan. The relationship between Luopa Mountain and Beiwepiun Mountain is so good that they wear a pair of trousers, so there is no reason why they should not know about this matter. Makushuan gave him such an unpleasant name, but in fact her real name was Su Qingshan. She followed the general direction of the golden light and ran to the Middle-earth divine continent alone. How is this different from finding a needle in a haystack? That's right, a woman's heart is like a needle in the sea. Now they don't even understand what that golden light is or what it contains. Because Master Makushuan personally told the 3 of them that if he loses, he will definitely not be reincarnated due to his special status. Although he was saying these words that were suspicious of last words, they saw a kind of relaxation and expectation on Ma Kuxuan's face. Wang Zhu was very sad to see this. Even the hatchet boy, who was a little more generous than Lao Ma, and slept under a quilt when the sky fell, was also very sad at the time. Maybe Ma Kuxuan couldn't stand this kind of atmosphere, so he kicked the young disciple in the crotch. The latter screamed and said that if it broke he would fry a plate of egg fried rice for you. At that time there was no meaning on Su Qingshen's face. Zhou Xian smiled and said, "We in Luopa Mountain will not be so destitute that we need to embarrass a young woman." Wang Zhu seemed to be waiting for this answer and said, "Junior brother Gao can name that name today, but I want to take a gamble and wait until I reach the nascent soul realm and reach the bottleneck." The implication is that he plans to use this name in exchange for a stable jade pure realm. But if he successfully breaks through the bottleneck, the mystery will be revealed later. Betting Luo Shan and Qin Pingon would not embarrass Su Qingshen, nor would they embarrass themselves, Ma Kexuan's founding disciple. Then the name he knows will be of great use at critical moments. Zhou Xian nodded and smiled. As expected of Ma Kexuan's chief disciple, he dares to take risks and even more dares to gamble. Ma Kexuan left Qin Pingon with 3 puzzles. The answer actually has 2 layers. Even if Qin Pingon knew the 3 names, he still had to guess who they were and what they would do. A group of uninvited guests from Qingming World, headed by Zhang Fenghai from the new 14th realm, stood on the flat ground south of the Sword Qi Great Wall. In addition, there are Lu Yefeng, Lu Tai and Lu Bixia who were born in the Lu family of Middle-earth, 2 masters Lu Qi and Chao Zhu who are now in the Hauran world, Yuaning and Xingyuan. They all looked up to see the inscriptions on the city walls. This is it. For thousands of years, it has been a battleground for military strategists since ancient times. There was once a man who wore a bright red robe and guarded the door with a sword. He was a man who attracted the attention of the world. On the road to Jisa Peak Mountain, the white-haired boy who was patrolling the mountain with Xiao Mili suddenly stopped. She covered her forehead with her hand and staggered as if she was drunk. A tall old Taoist priest broke through the sky. He neither greeted Bai Yujing, who was in a mess, nor reported to Hauran Confucian Temple, but came directly to Luopa Mountain. As luck would have it, there was a boy in Tsingyi with 1 foot on the bench chatting with Taoist Master Xianwei. When he saw the old Taoist priest with a majestic figure, he saw that the opportunity was bad, so he shrunk his neck and ran away. I had a little misunderstanding with that old man who was very knowledgeable in Taoism. However, the old Taoist priest stretched out his hand to grab the back of his collar and lifted it up. "Want to run?" Qin Lingjun, with his feet dangling in the air, began to pretend to be dead. Xiego put his hands on his hips and laughed. "Ha, old Bixiao, long time no see. Where is my Xiaoma?" The old Taoist master of Donghai Temple, Taoist name Bixiao Cave Master. Xiao Mo needs to retreat in Haotsai Mingyue Taoist Temple. The date is uncertain. Let me tell you. Xiego glanced at Bixiao Cave Master. The old Taoist priest said from his heart. Taoist Guanxuan of Xuandu and Bai Yujing passed the sword across the state. Yu Do, wearing a feathered robe and holding an immortal sword, took the initiative to leave Bai Yujing and pick up the sword himself. After some time, Wu Shuangjiang, Gao Gu and Jiang Xiu, 3 of the old and new 14th realms, plus an Ascension realm sword cultivator Baolin, asked the sword Bai Yujing together. Xiego looked solemn. The result? The old Taoist priest said calmly, "They are all dead." Xiego raised his palm and rubbed his chin. The Taoist Xianwei hesitated again and again, but got up and slapped the old Taoist priest. The old temple master